Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the workshop meeting for this evening of June 10th, 2019. We have agendas available on the corner desk over here, or also we have a more detailed council packet available through the city's website. We also televise our meetings live on Charter Cable Channel 191, as well as through the city's website and also Facebook Live. If you have any cell phones, I'd ask you to mute those so that the meeting isn't interrupted. And if you get a chance to speak with council this evening, if you come up to the podium and share your name with us, we'd be grateful for our record keeping. With housekeeping taken care of, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll.
Alvarado.
Present.
Barajas.
Present.
Maloney.
Here.
Martinez.
Present.
Milne.
Present.
Serrano. Watkins.
Here.
7 present, Mr. Mayor.
With all is present, if you'd join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Third item on the agenda is verbal reports from council members. Anybody attend a meeting or event that they wish to share with council? And I'll start off. Having attended, Richland had the ribbon cutting for their new City Hall. Wonderful facility. I know that Mr. Maloney was there as well, and I saw also John Funfar and Saul came in, and Mr. Martinez as well. Wonderful space, about 40,000 square feet, and if I remember right, about an $18 million price tag, 3 stories, just next door to the previous City Hall, and they'd done some extra special things, including pulling some older art or historical pieces from the city of Richland. Very well done, and so our neighbors to the west have a wonderful new City Hall, and it was great to see them in their new space. Any other thoughts? Hearing none, we'll move on. We do have a full agenda tonight. Section 4 is chock full of stuff to talk about tonight, including item 4A related to the Downtown Pasco Development Authority funding agreement. Mr. Morales, good to see you this evening.
Good evening, Mayor and the Council. Michael Morales, Department of Community and Economic Development. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation for you this evening. This is a fairly straightforward contractual matter, but did want to provide some explanation as to why we are here for a second extension on the DPDA contract. As you are aware, we have operated under 2-year agreements with the Downtown Pasco Development Authority, and coming into 2019, we were set for another renewal contract. At that time, if you recall, the executive director of the DPDA had resigned to take another position and left in mid-December. And going forward, they did agree to have the operations manager serve in the capacity and have the authority that he had. And so at that time, they felt it was best to have just a 6-month extension with the thought that we would then give them time to recruit a new executive director, as well as then have that executive director maybe look at the agreement and see what things might be improved in that. So in that time frame, we managed the recruitment process for the DPDA. We actually had a very good process. We had 16 applicants that came in over the course of about a 3-week period. We had the opportunity to reach out and do some recruiting at the National Main Street Conference, where a few of us presented on a panel about downtown Pasco. And then following that, we had a round of interviews and interviewed 6 different candidates. And then, of course, these things take a little bit of time once you go into there. So then in reporting back to the board determined and agreed with the committee that, yes, let's invite these 3 finalists in for interviews, final interviews with the full board and meet the community. And in setting that up and coordinating 7 board member schedules, we had initially set that to be, I believe, the 30th of May was the target date for those final interviews. And in that time, 2 of the 3 finalists were offered and accepted positions closer to where they were from. One was from Puget Sound, one was in Oregon. And then the 3rd candidate just decided to withdraw. And so At that time, then the executive committee discussed this with the operations manager, who has agreed to continue serving in an interim capacity at least through the end of the year or for as long as they need him to do so. And so they will be acting upon that at their board meeting in this June. So again, the thought being that rather than go into an 18-month agreement, because the hope is still that giving a new executive director a fresh start and looking at a contract would be the best approach to do that. The board has also, we have a fairly new board there with the DPDA, and so a lot of them are still learning their roles and their responsibilities. A good part of the retreat, so to speak, of the board this last March was just centered around what is a public development authority, what is your role as a board member, what are the main street parameters that we work under, and so they're getting their legs underneath them as well. The plan for recruitment of the executive director then is to it's been suspended. It will be reopened later this autumn, September, October timeframe. Sometimes, in my experience, that's a good time to be out recruiting because budgets are out. So sometimes people are beginning to see my budget's not going to be what I need, or looking for other opportunities. Sometimes elections have consequences, or they see them coming. So you might have some more candidates in the works at that time of the year as well. And so if we can get this wrapped up by the end of the year and then go into another full contract, that's what the plan is right now.
Questions or discussion? Mr. Alvarado.
Has the board discussed any, and I don't know if it's appropriate to ask, so let me know if it's not, any updates to the compensation for the Economic Development Director?
No, not at this time. They, in terms of the position that we will be recruiting for, the advertisement, no, but I think that when we look at revising the announcement, those are all things to consider. We, kind of tagged a mid-range on that, depending on the candidates we got. And again, we had a good cadre of candidates that applied based on that salary range, but it may be something certainly they can revisit. Of course, it's a subject of a matter of what they think they can afford in the long term as well. But everything will be open for review in terms of the job description and the announcement that goes out later this fall.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? So I'm going to interpret that as going with staff's recommendation then and put that on the agenda for consideration then.
Okay.
And just generally, I also know that we have a lot of folks in the audience tonight, so as I look to these things, I'll look around and see if anybody's got a hand raised on a particular item if you're interested in speaking. And with that, we're through section A, or 4A. We're going to go through to item 4B, Pasco School District 2018 Capital Facility Plan Update and Impact Fee Report. Mr. White.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. Council has seen this item before, almost exactly a year ago, as a matter of fact. The City Council adopted in March of 2012 school impact fees, and those fees are administered through an interlocal agreement that requires the school district to submit every 2 years their updated capital facility plan so that council can, by motion, incorporate it into our comprehensive plan so that we can be in conformance with state law and the school district will be able to use impact fee monies for the projects listed in their capital facility plan. There was a bit of an uncomfortableness with last year's efforts for that every 2-year update. There had been instances where county fees were not collected through the district's use of a loosely worded SEPA agreement. We believe that that has been fixed by close work with the school district's attorney and with the city's own use of the availability of city water and the concurrent acceptance of applicable City of Pasco development regulations for county land use projects that use city utilities. So although, as luck would have it, the county permitting activity dramatically fell off, so there's no square test of the district's new policy related to impact fees in the county areas, we believe that their new agreement and the city's conditional extension of utilities does away with the uncertainty of collecting impact fees within the county. The problem is that without having an updated school district capital facility plan incorporated into our comprehensive plan, the district is unable to use impact fees for work related to the 4th high school site, which is on their 2018 capital facility plan, and they are kind of chomping at the bit to get going on that. So again, Mr. Mayor and Council, although there's no empirical evidence at this point that the impact fee strategy works convincingly because we simply haven't had building permits issued in the county to test it, we do believe that the contingency is very well crafted and will be able to enforce collection of impact fees once a permittee obtains the connections and permits for city utilities.
So sounds like then the table is set to be able to reasonably collect impact fees for any development within the school district, whether it be the city or the county.
Yes, particularly in the city, and definitely, in this case, in the county.
Okay, but there's nothing that obligates, that we can see as a concrete obligation that it will be. You see that there's then some technical things, but is there even a policy statement saying the school district shall collect similarly from the city and non-city elements? Is there anything like that?
I don't know that there's a distinguishing statement that talks about city versus county developments, but the impact fee, of course, is centered in their capital facility plan, and it goes through great length to discuss that.
Okay.
And so, and by the way, Mr. Nunemaker is here from the school district. Perhaps he can answer that question specifically, but I don't recall any policy that distinguishes county versus city.
Okay.
It simply talks about impact fees.
And stick around, but I'm gonna end up having that question. We'll see what else we need, because I know that Mr. Martinez would also like to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So basically, from the way I understand it, the way I read it is that, basically in the urban growth area or wherever the city would provide waters is where we have more clout on being able to receive the impact fees. So basically, anywhere else in the county, it's really undecisive on how we can mandate those impact fees. And and I don't know if there's anybody from the county here in the audience, but the only thing that I understand is that if I'm not mistaken, I think you can only buy parcels of, unless it's already a 5-acre parcel, you can only buy parcels of 20 acres or less, or more now in the county. Do you know, Mr. White?
No, the county has a variety of zoning designations, and it would be difficult to create parcels, depending on location, less than 5 acres. But I'm certain there are parcels less than 5 acres already existing that could be purchased and perhaps permitted for a house, let's say. Yeah. Now, whether they're in the school district or not would depend on location, of course.
Okay. Well, I have my reservations, but I just don't understand why we can't have them all participate the same, but I got more to think about it on that one.
Maloney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If my understanding is correct on this, Mr. White, this is a continuation of exactly what we spent the last year doing. This is just a continuation of this as we continue to collect more data. The school district's not asking for additional impact fees or any changes to that nature. This is simply, in essence, an extension of what we have right now.
Yes, the district, in both biennial updates, the district has not requested an increase in the impact fees, which they haven't done in 2018 either. So yes, it's a continuation of the existing impact fee, but it's an updating of the projects on the capital plan. And without formal reference by council of that into our own comprehensive plan, the district is legally unable to use impact fee monies for, in this case, the 4th high school site.
Thank you.
Mr. Nunemaker, good to see you this evening, sir.
Yeah, sorry.
Your thoughts are, and we appreciate you coming and want to keep working with the school district and know this is very critically important. So what kind of movement have we seen since some of the concerns we shared with the school district in the past?
Well, first of all, thank you for allowing me to speak, Mayor and Council. Appreciate that very much. I want to thank the City of Pasco staff and the time it took them to review our request for approval for the 2018 Capital Facilities Plan. Excuse me. This approval, if it goes through, would allow the district to access funds in support of a 3rd comprehensive high school, which of course we're overcrowded at the high schools right now, and that's something that's needed badly. We have 16 classrooms and portables out at Chiawana, 25 classrooms at Pasco High School in portables right now. We have been working with the city as requested. The council requested last year that we keep updates to the city on how mitigation fees in the county are being collected. We've been doing that. We provide them updates. Currently, we know that there's 4 developments that are planning on building. To this date, there has not been any activity as far as building permits drawn on those 4 projects. And that's one of the drivers behind us collecting our fees is when they submit for a building permit. Until they do that, we have no mechanism to collect the mitigation fees. And so consequently, we've been waiting for the year to do that. We haven't been able to exercise that. We do have agreements signed with each one of those developments right now. These agreements have gone further than what the original, more of a memorandum of understanding that was put in place at first. That was difficult to collect fees on. We think we have agreements, we've provided those to the city also, where we'll be able to collect on those fees. And the city worked with us on those, and so we appreciate that again very much. So what I want to do is reaffirm our commitment to collect those fees for the district, and we'll continue to provide updates to the city, and we specify exactly what developments we have, where they're at, what they have or haven't done as far as permits. But up to this time, there hasn't been the opportunity to collect those fees yet. And we're still idling, waiting for to be able to access those funds so we can move forward with some of the projects, an example, the high school. In the case of the water question, I think that Mr. Martinez had, there's two scenarios. There's city water, that, of course, that's provided, and in that case, Mr. White kind of explained that. In the case of a well where you don't have that, we still have our agreement then that goes into place. They submit the CEPA request. We cite that there's going to be an impact with that request. We go ahead and file an appeal immediately, so that the county then will have the developer make contact with the district before they move forward. And that's the driver to get them to come to us, so that then we can talk about the agreement and what those mitigation fees, how they'll be collected.
And so, just so I'm clear, in that scenario where that it is one that doesn't intersect with city water, it just obligates one. It sounds like it obligates one to talk. I know that in the city case that the fees are collected from the developers, and I believe the people can't occupy developments until they get a permit. And is that same arrangement set up with the county?
Not that same arrangement, no. That right now the motivation is for them to come to us. We talk about it. That's what the appeal process is for. If they say, I still don't want to do it, we've already filed our appeal to go back in front of the Franklin County Commissioners, and then we start the appeal process, which my understanding will go to the commissioners first, and then it continues up the chain, if you will, as long as we continue to appeal that, which we plan on doing if that's the case.
Okay. Other questions of Mr. Nunemaker? And if not, I guess another question then is, or observation is, call me a little bit skeptical, but I would not be surprised if they're pulling a permit until City of Pasco decides something. So what I'm concerned about is, in 2012, Mr. Morgan stood there and said very emphatically and clearly that developments all within the school district will be held to the same standard, and was very insistent, and that didn't end up happening exactly that way.
Correct.
And I'm not even actually hearing. I'm hearing bits and pieces that tonight, but I'm not hearing from the school district a commitment that things will be held to the standard. I hear a few details of where there's administrative reasons why it might happen, but I'm personally not comfortable yet that that's there. I also am very aware that the school district needs all of these funds, but also in the interest of fairness, I got to wonder whether or not we should do this until we've got all the developers in the school district paying the fees that they should, and one not ducking out, being able to get away with things. That's my concern.
I can absolutely take that back and review that with the school district and the staff there. My understanding is that is the purpose of the SEPA, is for us, that gives us the avenue to challenge that and have that, and make them come to us and have the agreement, which we have them sign before they can move forward. My understanding, their developments are stopped at that time, and they can't move forward until we reach an agreement, or then if they say no, then we go ahead and go through the appeal process. Now, we haven't attested the appeal process, and we won't be able to do that until something happens in that case where we would be able to test it, where if somebody doesn't want to pay it, says no, then we would go through the appeal process and see how that works and how effective that is. But that, right now, my understanding is that's really the only avenue open to us to say, we want this, we need the mitigation fees. Fees are the same as the impact fees in the city. We've tried to make everything level playing field.
And I noticed there is a letter from the school district signed by the president of the school board. I'm not seeing anything to that effect in that letter or any of the documents that we've received this evening. That would certainly make me feel a little bit better to know that there is a commitment to the school district to the principle that everybody who develops should pay their fair share, and would make me more comfortable in being able to support this.
Okay. I'll be more than happy to take that back to the district.
That said, that's one opinion. We have other council members too. So, Mr. Serrano.
Thank you. And thank you for your time, Mr. Nunmaker. I know some of the discussion talks about the calculated fee could be much higher. Looks like about 20%, I'm thinking. Not a math guy, but close enough. Do you foresee yourself or someone coming back to us asking to raise these fees in the near term?
No, there has been no discussion about raising the fees.
Okay, thank you.
Any other discussion? Mr. Martinez.
I just want to make sure I understand, are these developments only? What about single, people who apply for a single permit for one house? Is that different?
Yeah, short plats are not included, or single developments like that, and so those aren't collected on. And that one I can't really speak to. There's a reason for that I don't have that with me.
Okay, all right, thanks.
So that's a case that then, say a house gets built in Pasco and it's the $4,700 fee, there could be a case then in the county, even with all these things that you've talked about, that could build a house without paying that fee.
Yeah, if they short plat it, then we're told that's hands off for us.
And does this, impact fees are also highly regulated by the state. Do they not contemplate that possibility? I would imagine the state enabling legislation on impact fees have considered that. Is that something, that might be a question for Mr. White or for the attorney?
The state, they are highly regulated by the state of Washington, but many things are exempt from SEPA consideration, like a single permit for a single-family house is exempt from SEPA administration. So there will be cases in the county, because the county has not adopted an impact fee ordinance for school mitigation, that would be exempt from paying that $4,700 or whatever amount they've determined.
Okay. Thank you for the information. So I'm going to suggest then, or what's council's pleasure on that? Put that on the agenda for consideration next week, or is anybody else interested in any other documentation information? Mr. Maloney.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I certainly appreciate your perspective, as there has been a failed agreement in the past with us in the school district. Obviously, I think we've all made clear our commitment to making sure schools are well funded. But I support your request for additional reassurances from the school board and the superintendent that this is the path that they will be taking to do everything they can to make sure that it's a level playing field. So I support that. Okay.
Anybody else on that? Support. I see one. I see several other nods too. Is that something then that? How about if that's something the school district can do in short order? As soon as we get that, I think we'd put that on the agenda for consideration.
Okay.
And is it kind of clear? Certainly, we also record these things so that hopefully the tone is clear of what the concerns that more than one council member
have.
Oh,
it's very clear.
Take that back, and we want to work with the school district, but we also I think it's reasonable to be even, and Stephen, with all the folks that do development in and around the city of Pasco, in the school district.
Yes.
Okay. Any other thoughts from staff or anything on this? Okay. Mr. Nunemaker, thank you this evening.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. With that, we keep moving on the agenda. We're going to go on to the next item, and that's presentation to the wastewater treatment facility plan update. Mr. Worley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Hold on just a second. Did I see? And yes, sir. I made an assumption there.
Sorry about that. Thank you, council. I have some very
just
recent.
share your name.
I'm sorry, Stephen Bauman. I live here in Pasco. I'm a developer. I have some very recent information based on what Mr. Nunemaker spoke of tonight, and there is considerable confusion on this very topic. With your permission, I'd like to share with you a letter I received today from the county in regards to one of these plats. Would that be okay?
I believe so. And if you have in written form, sharing it with the clerk, a copy of it with the clerk would be helpful.
It's the preliminary plat application. It's the return, their response to me. So I'll just read you the heading and then the specific part on schools. It says, Dear Mr. Bauman, the Franklin County Planning Commission at the regularly monthly meeting hearing on June 4th, 2019 reviewed your application for preliminary plat, subplat 2019-01. The application is to subdivide one 9.89 acre parcel into 16 single-family residential lots. Each new parcel will be approximately half acre in size. A new road, Duomo Court, will be created to provide access to 10 of the new lots, and improvements will be made to Pearl Street and existing right-of-way. On the conclusion of the public hearing and after discussion by the Planning Commission members, it was recommended that your application be approved based on the following findings of fact and with the following conditions of approval. So then there's a whole list, and I'll go to the one in regards to schools. It says school/school grounds. The project is located within the Pasco School District boundaries. Appropriate provision for schools and school grounds are provided through the public approved levies and general obligation bond measures. These funding mechanisms fund property acquisitions, fulfill maintenance and operation obligations, and fund new school construction. Washington State Capital Construction Funds are commonly available on a match basis for school-related construction. Recently, a bond measure passed where the voters approved a $99.5 million bond to finance many projects to increase the number of classrooms. No school impact fees have been implemented by Franklin County. The discussion at that's the conclusion of what they had to say. The discussion that was had there, and which I remember carefully, as I have two children in the Pasco School District, is some on the Pasco or the Franklin County Planning Commission felt that the school district is asking for double fees. We have the school impact fees, which was implemented when a bond measure failed a few years back. And now that we have bond measures that have passed, they felt that we are being charged double for that. And they do not have an intention of recommending the school impact fees. The city staff sent a letter to the county. I didn't get it until I walked into that meeting and got the packet, that essentially is making me throw away all of the plans that I had for that subdivision, which has been going on since last fall. I'm over $20,000 in cost of design for this subdivision, and it essentially says that if you have city water, we're going to tie the school impact fee to the water through that. Came in and talked with staff, and I asked, is this a request? Is this a requirement? The answer was, we don't know. And so there is a lot of missing information in this process. So I would really appreciate if we get this figured out, because it's got me stuck right now in a subdivision. And having followed the bond measure and the impact fees very carefully as a developer, I do feel that we are being double charged. We're paying our property taxes, we're paying bond measures, and impact fees. So Thank you very much.
And just so I'm clear in your position, you're not in support of school impact fees?
That would be correct.
Okay.
I do lots of development around here. We did bond measures. The purpose of the bond measures was to get acquisitions of property and build these schools. And the impact fees, I feel that we are being double charged.
And I would just ask too, when we did institute impact fees, were you part of that discussion that we had a variety of hearings and
I was here, was not involved at that point. Another thing that Mr. Nunemaker said that I did not read into it at all was I'm supposed to go to them to get some sort of agreement. I didn't read into that at all. I'm not sure how that works, that as a developer I'm supposed to go ask for their permission. I'm not sure how that works.
And said another way too, if a developer in the city of Pasco ends up paying the impact fee plus also the bonds and the other things too, do you think that's fair that others don't have to pay that fee?
No, it's not.
Okay.
I feel that both in the city of Pasco and in the county, it should be the same. I 100% agree with that. And I think that the impact fees was mitigated by the bond measure that was passed.
I appreciate your thoughts.
Thank you.
And if you could you, not right now if you don't need to, but if you could share a copy of that since it was read
Sure,
in
I can
to
email it.
the clerk, I'd appreciate that. Anybody else on that subject? If not, we appreciate the thoughts. This one's a little bit of the trickier ones. If not, we're going to move on. Item 4C, presentation, wastewater treatment plant facility plan update. Apologies, Mr. Worley, for cutting off. We'll try again.
No problem. Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Tonight, we're going to give a presentation on an update to the wastewater treatment plant facility plan. And I'm going to lead off by introducing Maria Serra, one of our senior project engineers on staff, and she has some help with her tonight to go through this. This can be a very technically complicated issue, but these guys have worked so well at making it so easy for you all to understand. We're not going to get into all the chemical treatment systems, but give you an overall view of the plan. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Maria to make introductions. I guess not.
Thanks, Steve, for the subtle reminder not to get too technical. I'm Craig Anderson with Murray Smith. We're a consulting engineering firm. Had the pleasure working with Steve, Maria, and Dave for some time now, developing this plan. First of all, thank you for this opportunity to give an overview of this facility plan. And at a high level, before I start, kind of just talk in general about what is a plan. And it's essentially, it's of a facility plan for a wastewater treatment plant is kind of your 20-year outlook to make sure the city is prepared financially to meet the financial needs of expanding the plant, to meet growth and regulatory needs. Typically, a plan is initiated, and it's actually required to be initiated when you reach about 85% of your capacity of your existing plant. Just all of this so you get a plan and always stay ahead. Costs at treatment plants are very expensive, and cities don't want to be caught blindsided. Thus, we have a plan. All right, let's see if I can use this. All right, presentation, I've kind of broken into three main parts. The first part I'll get into is kind of working on kind of an overview of your existing plant and give you a general synopsis of the layout of your existing facility and its function. This won't go into a lot of detail. If you looked at the executive summary, this is a high-level overview of your existing plant from an aerial with the various unit processes identified. For presentation's sake, this may not look that simple, but this is a schematic view of what your existing treatment plant does with the same identifiers as the previous slide. Treatment plants are generally broken into a number of unit processes with main functions. The first process I'd like to discuss is primary treatment. In this process, which is located here on your facility, there's a physical removal of contaminants in your wastewater stream. This first picture here is a view of the screen. This removes the large objects in the wastewater stream. They're removed, washed, cleaned, and taken to the landfill. This is a picture of grit, sand and debris that is then removed, also taken to the landfill for disposal. The remaining treated water is then taken to what we call primary clarification. These are your primary clarifiers. It's a large basin that allows the organics that are in the wastewater to settle out. The treated water looks something like this at this stage of the process. The water will go on for subsequent treatment, as well as the solids that are settled will go on subsequent treatment that I'll discuss later. The second step of the process, it's kind of self-evident, primary, secondary treatment, is this part of the treatment process. In the secondary treatment process, you use biological activity. You use bugs to consume the dissolved organics. So you're essentially taking the organics and contaminants in your wastewater, the dissolved or fine particulates, and converting it to bug mass. City of Pasco does this one of two ways. The first way is with a trickling filter shown here, which is basically you're growing a slime growth on rocks. The rocks consume the organics. Then you also have an aeration basin, which is essentially you have a whole bunch of bugs living in a jacuzzi, a suspension of air, eating the bugs. And similar to primary treatment, you go to a secondary clarifier, where the bugs are settled out and separated from the water. The settled bugs are taken to a treatment process I'll explain in a bit. The settled water at this point is treated as well, but you see it looks substantially better. With most of the contaminant, oh yes.
Quick question. What's the time frame in this process? Just curious.
Let's see, like at the aeration basin right there, it's about a 4-hour time frame. I would say you're probably in the 8 to 12 hour time frame collectively within the plant.
Thank you.
Good question. You had to think about that one. So it's been treated. The water's been treated. The heavy solids removed. The bugs have eaten what's in solution. Well, now it does still have some pathogens and viruses. It's time for it to be disinfected. At Pasco, you use ultraviolet radiation to essentially, ultraviolet light, to essentially sterilize whatever remaining bugs are in there. And your water, this is actually the same picture as before because you can't really see those little bugs. But that you have treated and safe drinking, or not drinking water, safe water at this point. The last part is, some people call it disposals. I like to use reuse. What do you do with this treated wastewater? That's at this last little part. It goes in the city of Pasco out to the Columbia River. An interesting part for you guys to take into consideration is the Quad City Water Right actually gives you a credit for every gallon that goes into the river. So it's a nice, you take it off for water treatment in a different location, of course, treat it to a high level, put it and mix it in the river, and return it to use. And we talked about those various solids that were settled out. Those are part of the solid treatment train. That's this part of the schematic down here. Essentially, you take the settled solids, the bugs, as well as those that have settled out in the primary clarification, and they have to be kind of treated and stabilized. One of the first steps there is this is your dissolved air flotation tank. This is where you've taken out most of the bugs go in a circle. Once they're settled out, you'll bring them back to the aeration basin so you have a stable community, but they're reproducing, so there's excess. You take the excess, you thicken them here, and then along with the primary solids, you go to a process called digestion, where you use heat, time, and temperature, or heat and time and natural processes, again, biology, to have them kind of eat themselves, break themselves down to remove the volume and to make those solids safer. This is your digestion facilities. Once it's done digesting, you take those solids and thicken it, remove all the excess water as best you can, and then you take the beds where you dry it out in the sun. Now, for the disposal, or once again, the reuse of this material, the city of Pasco, after it's done in the drying beds, has some storage. Once it's stored for a while, you have a contract with Natural Selection Farms, who hauls it off and uses the solids as a beneficial soil supplement to land that they own and manage. Any questions? Item 2. So, quick level on your planning period. I want to kind of get into your planning period impacts. We look 20 years out into the horizon, and by impacts, I'm looking at things that you will have to address over the next 20 years, and you can kind of get a precursor to what they are. One you have to deal with is the age and history of the facility. This is your schematic. This is it color-coded by age. I won't go into all the specifics, but there are parts of this plant that go back to the 50s. The majority of the plant is 25 to 45 years old. It is functioning very well at the moment, and to be brutally honest, the city has done a tremendous job of getting the most they can out of this facility, better than most I've seen. However, what that means is you have a fair amount that is kind of at the end of its useful life. The other impact is growth. The blue dots here are the average daily flows to your treatment plant in million gallons per day. The black line is a projection of your, what we'll call your average annual, the flow that goes to your plant on an annual basis. The upper two lines are max day and max month and max day. We look at different parameters depending on the unit process that we're sizing. This is a snapshot out of the facility plan. Currently, you have 5.9 million gallons per day, kind of on an average annual basis, with a max month of 6.5. By the year 2040, they were nearly doubled to 9.8 and 10.8 MGD. Well, what does that mean to your plant, or what are the impacts? Well, everything here in red will be deficient by 2040. As you can see, that's a fair amount of your existing infrastructure. The plus side is that does not mean most of this is throwaway. Some of this still has useful life and will be retained and used. But what are our solutions to deal with those impacts? First, this upper part, if you hear me mention it, this is what I call the liquid treatment process train, and this is the solids treatment process train. We looked at a total, at the very beginning, of 49 total alternatives, roughly 25 on the liquid side, 24 on the solid side. We were then able to whittle that down to 13 through workshops with the city for detailed analysis and selection of alternatives. As a result of that process, this is what we ended up with. I won't get into the details of what went away and what been added, but we essentially, through the analysis and considering economic, regulatory, and kind of ease of use and functionality, ended up with a treatment plant similar to what you have now, but significantly expanded. Here's the big shock, the bottom line. Over the next 20 years, there is over $76 million of improvement necessary at your treatment facility. Here is that same thing represented in kind of a projected cash flow that we're working with the city on for their CIP. For reference, in the facility plan up here is what we call the max month flow that you see, that we're predicting that you will see at your treatment facility. And this is so that, you know, the city can grow faster or slower. This gives you a reference as you're implementing this plan to see whether you need to go faster or slower to accommodate modifications to your plan to adjust for growth. However, this much of the plan through 2026, approximately 40 million, needs to be done regardless of growth. Now, of course, the plan is as we replace or repair these items to expand them for the future, to accommodate the future growth. It just makes sense from an economy of scale standpoint. And with that, I'm open to questions.
Okay.
Mr. Martinez.
Thank you. So the next 20 years, $40 million.
The next 10 is roughly 40.
Next 10 years?
Yeah, the next 20
million.
is 76.
Do we get government, do we get, I don't want to say assistance, but grants or funding from the state to help us with this?
We were definitely going to be looking into that, yes. Every opportunity we can.
Okay. Yeah, because it's going to be a tremendous impact if we don't. So it's going to be imperative that we do that to see how we can go about in minimizing the impact here. But it's something we have to do, and I appreciate you working to figure this out, because this is quite intensive, and we just got to figure out how we're going to budget this, and that's why we're here, obviously. But thank you for the information.
If you could back up a couple slides to that, but I think the $76 million slide is going to be probably helpful and central, and let's have a look at it between this and the other one. So, and just so I'm clear too, our sewer system is paid principally or ideally by ratepayers that use that service. And this is also one that we've, so I'd imagine this is a combination of, as it seems to be front-loaded, there's some significant expenses in the next 10 years. We have a sewer fund with a balance. We also have fees that I'm trying to remember, we probably have not adjusted in a bit. We've probably done some rate studies. So part of it is going to be rates, part of it's going to be, there's going to be a mixed funding package. We're not going to solve the funding package tonight, but this is the evidence that there's a very technical need to update this equipment as well as we're growing in size as well.
That is correct.
Okay. Other discussion, questions? Mr. Maloney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for the presentation. Now, I'm not sure quite who to direct this to, so I'll just throw it out there and someone can help me. So how do these values compare to the CIP we approved, last year, end of last year?
I think the CIP numbers we had in, and they've been that way for a couple of years. We've just had plug numbers of about $5 million a year in there, knowing CIP is a 6-year program, so we didn't have 20 years worth in there. So probably actually 5 years, $25 million, probably not far off from where you're at right now. But we didn't have the rest of the story, the other $50 million over 15 years.
So, because if I remember correctly, and I poked around a little bit, I'm trying to get, but I know there's this time phasing here, and I'm not sure I capture everything. My recollection is even the project 1 there, the first phase, is significantly a bit above what we reviewed and approved this last year. But we do have a large number, as I recall, in for a number of public works projects. So not all of this is brand new, and not all of this is super, I guess it's a big number, but it's not a number that we haven't talked about needing some significant improvements to our infrastructure, both sewer, water, everything. I remember the CIP was chock full of a lot of upcoming expenses to get our infrastructure, keep our infrastructure functioning well, and replace what is frankly out of date and aging infrastructure, right? So are we going to be seeing more than just this sort of adjustment for the wastewater treatment? We're going to see it for other areas as well, or?
Well, this one was specific to the facilities plan, which the reason you had plug numbers in there last few years is because this plan wasn't complete and we didn't want to make guesses. We knew it was going to be kind of on the order of $5 million a year for quite a few years. And now you'll see specific projects that are going to probably be bundled differently, and you're going to probably see some bigger numbers. Now, on the other hand, we have not bonded in the past the way we thought we would, because this has taken a little bit longer working with ecology and getting this thing right. And so you'll probably see a revenue bond, say, next year to start funding some of these big elements that we need here, as well as perhaps other system improvements, collection system improvements.
All right, thank you.
If I may, I had one thing I meant to mention earlier, and I immediately went off script once I started flipping. Just for your reference, if you were to build this facility from scratch for 2040, you're probably looking at $200 million from the ground up. So it gives you an idea of what we're able to reuse from existing infrastructure.
That's helpful as well. Mr. Alvarado.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Certainly very interesting world of making sure our water is cleaned. From a I guess from a procurement standpoint, how are these costs managed? Is there, none of us have any kind of idea what any of these components cost or anything like that. So is there kind of a regulatory body that has, some form of way of how do you project these numbers, accounting it for inflation and all these things for, to be able to, I really appreciate seeing the phasing, but how do we know that these numbers are actually numbers that we can look at for the future?
I can answer part of it from like the numbers for the future. All of these numbers, because we cannot predict the future, are based on what we use. There's an engineering news record, has a construction cost index. These are all based on today's dollars. It tracks 20 key cities across the United States, and there's also Seattle index you can use. So as you get closer to these projects, or you can start to look at the inflation. But all of the costs that were developed were based on our expertise in similar projects, including vendor quotes. And if you If you really want to look at the facility plan in detail, it's a rather long, lengthy document, but in the appendices there are the cost estimates developed for these.
I guess it's a positive thing when council members are jumping to, let's solve how to finance all of this. I guess one of the questions I would have too is the technical analysis that they did to this, so staff are supportive that it makes sense, and these are the details of these recommendations that were obviously more detailed than were presented to us tonight comport with what staff thinks is the best direction to go with?
Yes, I have to give credit to Murray Smith and Associates, and especially Craig, because they did a lot of work in coordinating not only with the engineering staff and the city manager's office, and also with our operations staff out at the wastewater treatment plant. And they brought all kinds of options and ideas, and we sat through workshops trying to identify, okay, what is the best processes? What are the benefits of it? What are the drawbacks of it? And like Craig said, there are so many different options available to us. We had the opportunity to look at the best for the biggest bang for our buck that we could look at. And so this plan represents the culmination of all those workshops and the coordination with everybody. To get at the other question about how do we control costs and stuff, this project, although it is large in scope, is treated no different than any of our other projects, where as soon as we are ready to move forward, we will typically go out with a request for qualifications, select a consulting firm to design the project for us, and then we will work our way through each of those individual projects and design the elements of it that make the most sense to get constructed first. And then as part of that design process, they also look at how can we construct that project while still working on a plant that is operating at the same time. And that's part of the design work that they do. And these guys are experts at it. They do this all the time. And so we then will bid that project out to get good contractors who are skilled in this type of work, and then we will manage those construction contracts based on the design that was done. So that's how we will control the costs.
If you wouldn't mind, flip over to the other one that had the years, and I think you had just kind of real shorthand. So 1A, B, and C in the next 3-year time frame have to do with outfall, a secondary treatment plant project, so that seems to be an addition of infrastructure, and outfall project 1. So those, for example, there's two parts to this. One, you're laying out a specific thing of where there's significant activity every year, almost all the years of the 20 years, with a little bit front-loaded. But also, I think the last time we looked at our sewer, we were thinking more of a 10-year time frame. So this seems a little bit more ambitious, and it's looking larger at a community that's going to be about 140,000 in 20 years. Mr. Zabel?
Yeah, I would agree with that. And that's one of the points I was going to make, is we need to keep in mind there's going to be 50,000 new users to help pay for it as well. It's not just the people of today that are going to pay for this, because the bonds are going to get paid over a 20-year period, most likely. And I think the worst thing you could have heard tonight would be $70 million and it's all attributable to growth. What you heard was you got a plant that's worn out. So the users got to use their plant. Mm-hmm. They paid for it. They used it out. It's like driving a car. When you're done, you go get a new car. You put a new motor and transmission in it, whatever you decide to do with it. But we're kind of at that point. So everybody's kind of in this together as a ratepayer, whether you've been in the system for 20 years or you've been in the system for 20 months with your new home that you bought. So that actually, from a legislative and a staff standpoint, makes it a lot easier to explain to folks, here's why we have to raise rates.
Okay, and that's going to be one of the things that we're going to have to look at, and should be looking at, is the rates that we are doing for this.
We'll be bringing rates to you this fall.
Okay.
Yeah, so okay. We will be doing that.
So trying to wrap this up with a bow, this is a preview of, I think, a snapshot of the next 20 years for as far as our wastewater treatment plant goes. And thanks for, I think that slide's going to be helpful to council members moving forward in the coming years. And we also know that staff are going to be coming together with recommendations how to fund this sort of thing at future meetings. And any other discussion by council? Mr. Elliott, any other thoughts, Mr. Zabel?
Yeah, I did want to note to Ruben's comment about how are we watching this and how did we make sure this is the direction to go, is we probably have the most skeptical person on this plan sitting in the front row over there, our senior engineer, Sarah. There's nothing in this plan that is a Cadillac. Everything is to get the job done, and it's the best, most logical recommendation that we could bring to you.
I guess I'm going to ask you too, is there anything that we've missed that we should have discussed tonight as a council body?
No, I think it was very thorough.
Okay. So we appreciate you've sat there very quietly, but we know that you've been working in this, and we appreciate your efforts to bring to this point, and then all the things that are going to come because of this. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, council, for the discussion. So as usual with workshops, there's more to be talked about in the future. Going to plow on. We go on to the next item. Hey, this is about improvement plans, 6-year transportation improvement plan. Mr. Wardley, you're on deck again.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. As we do each year, we are here tonight to present to you the draft 6-year transportation improvement program. And as you may recall, this is something that is required by the state for each city to do. We look at the transportation projects planned out for the next upcoming 6 years. And so tonight we're going to have Dan Ford, our city engineer, give you the presentation on the proposal for the next 6 years.
Mr. Ford, welcome. And I kind of recall that we're usually towards the waning parts of summers when we do this. It's a little earlier than usual.
Well, it is due by the end of the month, so maybe things have just been going so fast that it's kind of hard to keep track.
I think you're right.
You know, it's a special night. We've had Maria Sear up here, one of our senior engineers, and I've got Mary Heather Ames, our traffic engineer, also here this evening. So I wanted to point that out to you. I was happy to get here a little bit early tonight, and I wanted to mention that I had the opportunity, a little bit off subject, but not necessarily, Cecilia Randolph, who's stayed very quietly through this evening. She's here this evening. She wanted to talk to someone about Juneteenth and the parade. I was happy I was here a little bit early, but I wanted to mention her. She was wonderful to talk to and got to share some information, and look forward to talking with her and helping her out tomorrow. So on to the presentation. We'll see if I can work my way through this. Again, the 6-year transportation improvement plan, what I have brought to you this evening, it looks rather cumbersome in the overall view that you've got there. We did try to make some modifications from last year's. It was a little bit surprising. I sat in the back this evening and wondered how many years I've done this. This is actually my 4th year, so you'd think I'd have it down by now. But that's the rate of change in Pasco. There's all kinds of new updated improvements as we move forward. So what I tried to do is blow up a couple of sections and be able to talk to you about those sections individually. And what I did is I decided to start in the Upper West area there and talk to you about a few of these projects. Again, these projects are listed both on the map and also in a spreadsheet that you've got. We've also got individual sheets this year, which we didn't have last year, that tries to provide a little more detailed information. These sheets will, as you probably have seen in the past, go into the CIP, and the information provided on these sheets is very similar to that. But again, I wanted to try to focus on a couple of these projects in some certain areas and kind of walk our way through that, because that overall sheet was a little overwhelming. So we won't necessarily be walking down through these by number, but I will share with you that the numbers that are on these are just map locations. They aren't necessarily prioritized in any manner. In fact, I went through all of these this year, which was part of the changes that I made this morning and part of the updates that you got today, and tried to not only retitle some of these so they made more sense, but also renumber these and group these together, as if you will. So, for example, I will start on this. 25 and 26 are brand new additions, and this is in support of the Adams property that we've all been anxious to kind of move forward with. And you're all aware of the Harris Road sewer that we are just finishing up to get into this property to provide utilities into this area. And this is the extension of Sandefur Parkway. You'll also remember the Interstate 182 discussion that we had before council that talked about internal improvements before they would look at interstate improvements. And you'll also note that as part of 25 listed there, Sandefur Parkway Extension Phase 1, There's also a ramp reconfiguration that goes along with that that I've included in there, and that was originally identified in that study. You'll see items 10, 11, and 12 up there. I know Pasco School District was here earlier, and they were talking about some of the new schools. This is on the south side of Burns Road. This is a proposed pathway similar to that we're putting on Chapel Hill. So a pedestrian bicycle type pathway on the south side of Burns Road in conjunction with the development that's going on the north side, in which concrete sidewalk will be on that side of the road. So I think this is something that will work with the school district and funding opportunities associated with that. Yeah.
Can we talk to those for just a minute?
Sure.
I'm looking at the budget and I'm seeing studies being baked out in 2021 for those 3 projects, but construction not occurring until 2022, 2023, and 2024. The school projects that the school district projects that both the elementary and middle school will be open in 2020. We got to have accessibility for those students that are walking prior to 2024. I mean, that's just, I'm going to lay aside the complaints that I've had from neighbors who have said that that should have been built back when development started. I'll leave that aside. But if these schools are going to be open in 2020, we need to have both sides of the sidewalk accessible.
Sure.
I'll leave it there.
You know, and that's one of the things that we actually did meet with the school here just about a week ago, and we started talking about tightening up some of these time considerations in conjunction with their projects as well. And so I'll share with you is this is one of those projects that we actually conceived based upon the school districts and working with them so that we can adjust these dates as well.
Okay, and I do appreciate that. And I don't intend to shoot the messenger here.
Oh, no, not at all.
Just looking at the timeline, it's like...
And you're not actually shooting just the messenger. You're actually probably shooting the guy that actually came up with the idea for the sidewalk improvement on the south side. So
that's why we're in a workshop meeting.
Absolutely, and that's what we're here for.
Dan.
And tying into that, we'll get on to Road 100 here in a minute because that's along those very same lines.
I don't know if I missed it, but the colors, is there a legend that tells us what the colors are for?
The colors were just to differentiate between the different projects.
Okay.
In fact, one of the changes that I made today was I had different colors stacked up at Road 68 and Interchange, and you couldn't see all the colors. So you'll see in your updated packet, I've actually started splitting them side of one another because they do overlap.
Okay. All right, thank you.
So again, Project 13 there, which is Road 100 on the interchange itself, a pedestrian bicycle pathway. Looking at that, again, that's one of the calls that we've received and the number of folks that we have going over that. One of the things that I can share with you, we've worked with WashDOT, and these the interchanges will be participation with WashDOT. They're within their jurisdiction, but we've already talked about the bridge deck width and the ability to go ahead and put that pedestrian walkway on that existing bridge deck. So that's a very positive situation there. Again, just quickly going through some of these, Crescent Road, for example, number 24. A lot of this will be developer driven. We've already got a couple of residential units in this area that have got deferments. So we'll work with those other developers on the south side with that as well. Number 16, Road 100. This is was a county area for quite some time. The right-of-ways through there are pretty narrow still. We'll have to work through quite a bit of that, but this is an opportunity to go through there, or a proposal, if you will, to go through there and widen Road 100 to the south. There's a lot of development midpoint up on the northern end, and the idea is to be able to carry those widths on down through the south.
And would that goal be 2 lanes each direction with a center turn lane?
Yes.
Okay, and that's
similar to what we currently have on the north end of that.
Okay.
And we would look at that as we go down through there, and maybe an opportunity to put, a turn lanes in that going down there. Nobody likes those 2 ways, especially when you're in the left lane and you get behind somebody. Number 23 is, I think you've seen this in the CIP package that was presented last year. This is a consideration for the FCID canal and a pedestrian bicycle pathway along that.
And I'm not sure if it's too late or not, but and I happen to live in that area. If in this, maybe just as a placeholder, but if in that study we have a significant amount of horses that do use that as an irrigation canal, as well in West Pasco. and I'm thinking of it, other communities, maybe there's an opportunity, pedestrian / horse trail, and not presuming that they're a compatible use, but if and when we do that study, if that might be something that could be considered, that
Yeah,
might be an interesting element.
I do recall that it was actually brought up in one of our discussions, so.
I don't know if that warrants a title change, if that's appropriate or not, but would just for consideration.
Sure, absolutely. We can definitely make that.
Quick question. On the Road 100, where we have, like, now there's a new development just north of Argent on Road 100. And that one, of course, the road is back further. Will the upgrade as far as the 2 lanes be sped up because of that being, or, I mean, it kind of like comes in, and it goes a single, then it would come back out. I mean, it would be nice to.
And we've got some right turn lanes, as you notice, as you're moving up to the north there, that it'd be nice to incorporate those and get those to smooth out as well. That's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to take advantage of those opportunities where those developments are occurring and actually going in and filling those in so that we don't have those inconsistencies as far as the travel lanes go.
So are we still looking at 2024, 2025, or are we looking
This
at?
is just a placeholder. The opportunity to do that, I think, is available to us as long as we've got those funds and we've made it known that that is on our tip. So that's really where this plan, although not fiscally constrained, it gives us that opportunity to move forward, should we see the opportunity.
Okay, understand. Thank you.
Mr. Alvarado?
Thank you. I figured we'd take a little break from the presentation and get a couple of these questions just pending. So at this point where this plan is at, this is for us to get something to submit to WashDOT, that this is our 6-year improvement plan. How granular do we get in this plan as far as when we say pedestrian or when we say expansion? How specific do we get as far as what that actually would look like?
Yeah, I don't think that we have to get so specific, but what's important is that the details are there should we have a funding opportunity, for example, in which we want to go after funds. And so what you'll see in many of these is I've kind of expanded that pedestrian to include bicycles as well, for example. So the opportunity, some of these you'll see as far as core roads go, but they don't include curb gutter and sidewalk, and there's reasons for that. So again, if there's the opportunity or if there's detailed information that's necessary, I'm happy to try to put that and provide that.
And a quick follow-up to that, I know that there's our region's a little bit of danger of non-attainment, and if that were the case, would that be like, let's say we have this this plan in, and then let's say because of our pollution we reach non-attainment where policies change and things like that. Obviously, we don't know that the future of that, but I guess my question is at what point would we have to shift gears if that were to happen? I don't know if that's even should be a consideration at this point.
I'm going to guess that's more probably higher level than beyond just this plan.
Yes,
That's probably affects more things related to the city of Pasco than maybe even Public Works, Mr. Worley?
Yes, if we ever get to a situation where we are in a non-attainment area, then typically what happens is the 6-year plans then are modeled at the BFCG to make sure that the proposed projects are not going to increase the air quality problems. And so it adds another element of requirement for everybody's 6-year transportation improvement plan to make sure that we don't create any more bad air.
Sorry to bring that up. I should
like his answer better than mine too. Thank you, Mr. Worley. Mr. Ford.
All right, moving on. A popular area, obviously, for all of us, kind of the Central Road 68 area. Item 6 there, Wrigley Drive. I know that we've talked about that one. That one is underway right now. We are looking at NEPA. If anyone's been out there, they've seen some other changes out there that I think are supportive of that as well. Today, this is the change that I made. I tried to better clarify 5, 7, and 14 there. 5 is that Burden and Road 68 signage and striping improvements. Again, somewhat tied in the past. You do recall Road 68 improvements, kind of a general term. You've heard dual rights, triple rights, those type of things. We've tried to focus that and get that with WashDOT's help and staff's help tried to get that a little more focused on exactly what we're trying to do here so that everyone's on the same page. 14, pedestrian bicycle over Road 68 interchange. Again, part of that will be brought on, and that's a partnership with WashDOT. There's existing pedestrian facilities already on Road 68. I do think that they need refreshing. The striping is pretty worn from what I can tell and whatnot. I've been in contact with them, and again, we'll continue to work with WashDOT on that as well.
Mr. Martinez?
Thank you, Mr. Ford. Yeah, I just want to make a note that yes, there is some pedestrian markings and whatnot there already. The challenge is that as we get more and more people and more young people walking over the bridge into Chihuahua High School,
Sure.
You know, what's there is great, but then it goes down to a very narrow and like just south of the bridge or south of Maverick. Now you're having kids walking this little 1 or 2 foot shoulder as cars are going 35 miles an hour through there, and it's getting really dangerous. And I've had, you know, several people say, when are you guys going to do something, you know, but anyway, just something to consider. You know, I don't know what to tell our citizens
Sure.
at that point, you know, and just an accident waiting to happen, because I don't know if we're going to stop the kids from actually doing that. So
Yeah, no, I totally understand. We've got item 7 here. And again, some of these adjustment-wise timeframe, some of this is considerate of the DNR property development, Chapel Hill, that area. Number 7 is the widening of Road 68 on the south side of the interchange there. Moving on to, again, the next general area, talk about some area or some improvements. Argent Road, you'll notice we've broken Argent Road into now what is 2 phases, but there's also the consideration we added the intersection of Road 44 and Argent. Some of you may remember that we actually, when we looked at traffic counts in support of the Argent project, we actually did go back to Road 44 because of the number, the ADTs that we were considering back there. That area actually does fall within the county. There's a little sliver of county property that comes across there, so we will work with the county to try to see what kind of improvements we can make there at that particular intersection.
Thanks for reminding about
It is a small, that line
doesn't
comes
show in
right
this
across there.
map, but there's a little chunk that does extend
is.
north of the freeway right there at that one house.
There is. Number 8 is the first phase, which is 20th Avenue over to Varney or Saraceno, depending on whether you're going north or south. And that is, we've got that one in hand right now. In fact, we are working through obtaining the property from not only the port, but also CBC at this point in time. And number 9 is the second phase of that. 21 is a consideration, essentially the Interstate 182 plan that I mentioned earlier that brought about the ramp changes at Road 100 interchange. This is kind of a continuation of that. What we would like to do is investigate the 395 with Interstate 182. As you all know, there are some deficiencies internally that are considered, and at this particular location, there are only certain directions that you can travel. So we'd like to continue with that, essentially calling this almost a phase 2 of that study, and see if there are some improvements that could be made in this area as well. Number 15 is Sylvester Street, again, an overpass that we're looking at, bicycle pedestrian. The situation that we have there is a very, very narrow deck on the bridge. It's an much older bridge. In fact, on both sides, it's very, very narrow. It's actually a raised concrete platform on either side that's integral to the railing. So there may be some other considerations that we have to look at there in order to get some pedestrian and bicycle opportunities at that particular location, including possibly even cantilevering out on one side of it to be able to provide that.
I think I may have gotten a little lost. Did you go through the slide that talks about 28 already? I think that may have been the last one. No, okay, never mind. I think I'm looking at another version of the...
There should have been a new version that was sent out today to everybody, so.
I'll come back to that one. Thank you.
Keep going, though, forward, Mr.
Okay,
Floyd.
and so 2 and 3 here, we'll talk about Lewis Street Overpass. Again, one of the largest regional projects that we've got for quite some time. We're excited to have that. And number 3 is Lewis Street Corridor project that basically will tie Lewis Street Overpass improvements into what is the Peanuts Park area. And we've already received some CDBG money associated with this. And what we're looking at this is safety improvements considered of Lewis Street, as well as sidewalk, pedestrian, bicycle type considerations in that corridor as well. So we'll continue to pursue funding opportunities as we can in conjunction with both Peanuts Park and Lewis Street Overpass. And then you'll see 22, and the dot's a little bit off there, but that is Tank Farm Road and SR 12 there, and the opportunity to work with WashDOT again to kind of look at an interchange at that location, especially as we start looking at the east side and the opportunity for expansion out there and improvements out there. This intersection here, interchange here, could be very important moving forward.
A comprehensive look at all the traffic around the city, and there's obviously a lot of stuff on 68 and especially 100 this year.
Yes.
But this is a 6-year time frame. 6 year is looking at crystal ball. Things that are a year or 2 out are more likely than stuff that are 6 years. But stuff even the 6 years will allow us to be able to pursue funding grants and that sort of thing. So you do want them on, even if they may shift over time. And that
Yeah,
sort of thing.
absolutely, and that's why we have approximately 30 projects on that particular list.
And tonight is a workshop meeting, and this goes to a public hearing next week.
Next week.
And then we'd let the public weigh in on it, as well as council members if needed. And this is more of an informational session this week. Mr. Maloney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Ford, for the detailed presentation, and I appreciate going through and updating that as well to clarify some of the stuff. It was an easier read the second time than it was the first time, so I really appreciate that. So I do understand that this is a unconstrained funding plan. So we're not looking at availability of funds and time phasing according to that, but rather than here's a set of projects and such. But how does this compare to the CIP? Again, that we similar to talking about the wastewater treatment. We just had a CIP approved. We just approved a CIP 6 months ago, or whatever it was, ended last year. Do you know how this compares to that?
Yeah, basically this is, for the most part, this is the transportation element of the CIP. You'll see many of these projects, if not all of these again, in the CIP moving forward. We will probably get a little bit more detailed as to the funding, but you'll see also an improvement this year. We created those additional sheets in which we tried to project some of those funding opportunities going forward and tried to do a bit of a crystal ball look at what we might look at. So what you'll see, for the most part, unless we make some changes, which is we can definitely do. And to that, one of the things I want to share with you is this is a plan like any other that we, with the growth of Pasco, we are changing. 2 of the first projects, I almost wish they were at the end of my presentation, were the Sandefur Extensions. Those were added less than 2 weeks ago. And this is as a result of some meetings that we had. And so the importance of the power of this plan and the ability of this plan to actually seek those funding opportunities and then adjust accordingly is really important to keep in consideration. But yeah, this is, for the most part, this is a transportation portion of the CIP going forward, but it will be a little more detailed when you get that in that version.
So just to follow up a little further on that, I'm thinking bottom line as opposed to individual projects. So when we're looking at a rough funding profile of $25 million in 2020, $8.5 million in 2021, is that roughly what the CIP was?
You're seeing a big spike in that, obviously, from the Lewis Street Overpass project.
Of course.
You'll see that taper down, and then you'll see it hover, if I remember correctly, about $5 or $6 million towards the outer years. That first year is a pretty good spike.
Sure, and I'm sorry, my question most specifically is we just approved, 7 months ago, we just approved a CIP.
Sure.
We had transportation projects as part of that. Is the overall number similar, or are they dramatically different? I simply don't remember how those things compare, and I think it's important for us. If it's in line with what we've approved before, then fantastic. You're telling me that this is the more detailed set of this. If there's a lot of changes, I'm interested in understanding what more detail some of those specific changes, what the ins and outs. But overall, are we about the same dollar sign?
Yes. Yes, we are. I apologize. I thought you were talking specifically the bottom line of the tip and how the fluctuations were being represented here.
No, I certainly understand, the time phasing of, for example,
Sure.
in 2020, understand the Lewis Street overpass is coming to fruition has been a long-standing
It has
effort
been.
and is a massive undertaking
It
and
has
massive
been.
dollar sign, so.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Alvarado.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Ford. So I have one specific question, and perhaps I'm just offline, you can perhaps give me a little more information about it. For instance, an overpass, number 28, that's, seems like a pretty big, heavy lift. So I have questions dealing with, like, do we have easements and things like that? I know we just passed the CIP south of there, and we went from a 3 to a 2 lane. And so there's some dynamics there that I'm just really interested in, but I think would take a long time during this.
Sure.
So I would just, love to have a little more information on how that all is coordinated and just making sure that we have a good plan as well.
Yeah, and that one is in particular Road 76 overpass that again appeared, or at least we have that in that Interstate 182 study. And one of the things that we're looking at is putting that out. We don't have the funding necessary for that right now. On the south side, we have planned for right-of-way, and so you'll see that in some of the plans associated with the DNR property and whatnot. That has been taken into account.
I think he brings up a point too, and it's probably been 3 or 4 years now, the fundamental things of potential crossings with 182.
Sure.
There was a fairly extensive study of which this is but one part of, and we haven't gone over it with this batch of council other than
Very
Saul
true.
and myself. So if you can dust a copy of that off, that would probably be very beneficial with
Okay.
all the council.
I can definitely do that.
So, 6-year plan, being public meeting tonight. Jeff, if there's any questions from the audience tonight, knowing that there is a public hearing on it next week. Not seeing any hands raised, so we're going to go ahead and keep moving on our agenda. Thank you, Mr. Ford. Mr. Milne?
Yeah,
And
just
then
a real
Mr. Zabel.
real quick question for you.
Oh.
I've been a proponent of, more bike paths, obviously in Pasco. I know they talked about, potential bike path from Court Street to the Adams property. Do you have an update on that, or do you know, is that like any kind of 6-year plan, or?
Court Street to the Adams property.
As far
going
as the
north?
bike path goes along Court, and then it goes through Chiawana Park, is there like, I know I've mentioned it before at another meeting, as far as having to go from like I-82, I know there's that farm there, but come on into that direction, into the Adams property, I mean, as far as like a bike path into that area, do you know?
Yeah, I don't recall anything. It's not that, obviously, that we can't. One of the considerations for the FCID, and not to change the subject, was, we're also, Chapel Hill also has that connector, and then the school on Road 76. So we are trying to increase that network, but specifically underneath the interstate there. I've not heard anything recently on it, but I can definitely look into it.
Well, let me said another way too. There's no specific project for connecting, as in bike and pedestrian specifically, but at the same time, there's a policy in the city that whenever you do new projects,
Yes.
Bicycles will be considered, especially on the new construction. Would assume that any one of these projects comes up, it would connect the dots more. Is that? And I see Mr. Worley nodding his head on that. I don't know if that's helpful, but as far as a comprehensive plan to where we're going to go build bike lanes everywhere, that's not something we've set as a priority.
That is correct. Council last year passed the Complete Streets Ordinance, and any new road projects, either by private development or by the city, we would take a look at all users of the street and the right-of-way. And so we would incorporate as many users as we possibly can within each street improvement. So if there are, or as is shown in the TIP, with the Court Street improvements, we would look at making those pedestrian facilities available as well. But I think to specifically answer your question, I, like Dan, don't recall a specific project to get from Court Street over to the Adams property.
Yeah, there was no like specific, I just asked, was it in the plan? Like last year, and they said, yeah, we'll consider it. I didn't know if there was still in the plan. I mean, the distance between I-82 underneath that bridge to the Adams property is pretty small compared to like if you went up Road 100 and then over.
Right.
I was just curious if there's something that is in the 6-year plan, or if it's just not there.
It's not there yet, but we
Okay.
can certainly take a look at that, and if it's felt that it's something that we should pursue, we can add it to the 6-year plan. I think it's a good idea, just thinking about that connection between the development that's going on there. It sounds like a neat idea.
So, Mr. Milne, if there's something that maybe specifically can be considered, if you got some specifics, maybe
I mean,
talk
I
with
would just like
Mr.
to see
Leo
if you
or
go
Leo
from Howard Amond over the bridge and you could get to the Adams property, if there's supposed to be a big park there and development, I mean, it'd be good to go from point A to point B.
Would you work with Mr. Worley offline as a possibility on that
Sure.
one?
Thanks.
Mr. Zabel.
Just a quick note on the distinction between the CIP and the TIP, because I think this is probably something worth council keeping in mind. So the CIP is kind of reality. It's our look at likely opportunities. So if we think we're going to get grants and we think our project's competitive, you'll see it in the CIP. If in the TIP, it's more about eligibility. If we don't have it in the TIP, we don't even have a chance of getting a grant. So you see a little bit broader batch of projects in the TIP than you typically will in the CIP, because that's more message to the funding agencies, and we're opportunity hunting, not opportunity predicting. So just
Appreciate the clarification on those municipal 3-lettered acronyms. Oh, no, actually, I really appreciate that clarification, reminder. I'd forgotten that. Thank you, Mr. Ford, also, and we do have some more items. Keep going through at least one more item before we consider possibly a break, if that's okay with council. We go on to Foster Wells Road Force Main. Hey, this is Public Works Night, Mr. Worley.
Yes, it seems that way, doesn't it? Thank you. We have one more presentation for you this evening. Try to cover a lot of ground. A lot of you may be aware that there's been some presentations previously in the past about the processed water reuse facility. And as part of that presentation, staff showed, and the consultant, Pace Engineering, showed lots of projects associated with the reuse facility. Tonight, our senior engineer, Maria Serra, is going to give you some information about one of those projects, and that's the Foster Wells Force Main. So,
good evening.
Good evening. Okay, we're going to talk about Foster Wells Force Main improvements. As Steve mentioned before, we a couple of weeks ago showed the overall facilities plan for PWRF. And as you see, number 5 there, Foster Wells Force Main improvements was included in that list of projects. And what we're seeing next to it is an overall aerial view that shows the PWRF, or industrial facility wastewater treatment, with the land application area, the city farm, the city-owned farm fields, and then the 2 service areas. We have the Foster Wells service area that is highlighted with an arrow for easy identification, and our Columbia East service area further south. So today we're going to talk about Foster Wells area and the connection between the existing lift station to the PWRF, and that is through a force main. There's an existing force main, actually it's a dual force main. There's an 8-inch and a 16-inch that they are they're old, and therefore they're suffering some failures. Those failures are really expensive and they cause shutdown, so therefore there is a need for that force main to be repaired or replaced. And that's something that was brought up through our meetings with our processors. Okay, here's a little bit of a description of the project. So the idea of the project is to install a new force main that will be parallel to the existing ones. It's a 2.4 mile force main. It's a 20-inch HDPE pipe, and it could run from the force main from the lift station all the way to the facility. And the idea of this is to have redundancy, have an extra force main that allows for operation in that force main while the existing ones are being replaced, and then switch over the flow, so therefore there is no shutdowns. Where is the project right now? The project has been designed, and it's advertised for bids at this point, so it's open for bids. we're currently pursuing permits. So we have a right-of-way permit with Franklin County, a crossing franchise permit with WashDOT. There's a BPA crossing of an easement. And we need some right-of-way acquisition to happen, which is at this point being pursued. There's negotiations going on. And as part of this project, and since it was brought up by the processors, we want to ensure that we have full commitment of the processors to pay back. So there's the reimbursement agreement that you're seeing there. This is a little overview of the project. You're seeing the Schedule A shown in green. That is the proposed force main. In orange, the existing force mains. And then in blue, you are seeing also our Schedule B, which is part of another project that we talked about, that is the Columbia East force main. And what we've done here is our current contract that is out includes a portion of that Columbia East force main where it is parallel to our Foster Wells one. It's an additive bid. Therefore, we can make the choice to award it or not, depending on what the bids look like and our internal decision. And what you're seeing then dashed in blue is the Columbia East, the portion that is not part of this contract. This is a separate contract that is being designed right now.
Quick question.
Yes.
Are these lines actually to scale, or are they just to show, or they indicate parallel, but they're actually, because
yes,
the width of the lines is like about 2.5 roads, but it's probably a narrower corridor? Okay.
Yeah, they're actually closer. We
Okay.
just wanted to show everything in one in one picture. Yes. Okay, and so what is our schedule for this? We have advertised at the end of May. Our bid opening was scheduled for June 11, but we've issued an addendum and we're extending the bid date to June 14th. We are hoping to award on June 17th, which is next week. Construction will begin after that, as soon as all our paperwork is done, which we're assuming is mid-July, maybe early July. And construction, there's 90 calendar days for construction, so that takes us to October. And, okay, this has to do with the reimbursement agreement with the processors. We have 3 processors that are the ones that have requested this project, and we have prepared an agreement with our legal support. That draft agreement has been routed, and we have now a final version that has been sent to the processors for signature, and we are not going to award the contract until we receive the signed agreement and it's fully executed. And questions?
I would just note too, this is something we've been working on because the processed water reuse facility has been so successful but it's also, I had been working for 20 plus years and it's been successful, and there's a significant value that the processors that pay for it once are willing to pay for it a second time for at least another round. Is that kind of one other way to look at it?
Yes, I think this specific case was actually, the need was expressed from the processors.
Thank you.
It was clear that the harm of a shutdown was much bigger.
It wasn't just us trying to drag them along, but they saw this and said, let's move forward with
yes.
haste. Okay,
yes.
that's good to know. Mr. Alvarado.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was very excited to come out there with Mr. Worley and get the sights and smells. And I think my question to you is does this so this is an improvement to have two mains, right? Is that correct?
There are 2 existing mains, and we're proposing a new main parallel to it.
Does this open us up for additional potential processors to want to come online, or is this like just to increase the capacity of the current ones only?
This is for the existing ones. It's a redundancy measure.
Right. In case one breaks and they don't miss out. But there's no kind of expansion or kind of thinking of like, okay, this could open it up so that we can be in a situation where a new processor wants to come in or things like that, or that's not necessarily?
No, the design of this force main is to serve the current 3 processors in that service area. It does consider their immediate expansion plans, just as we had analyzed in our facility plan.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Maloney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for the presentation. My question is, I guess, possibly more of a legal question than it is a technical question. So my question is, so if one of the current tenants were to no longer, decide no longer to be a tenant, would they still be on the hook for this whole cost? Or if another processor came in, would they transfer, would that, some of this cost transfer to that processor? How functionally does this happen if we were to have a turnover in that fashion?
I'm not the legal side of this, but the way we've got it set up is with that agreement that Maria talked about is to address that very specific issue. Because I understand that there was a situation previously where we had a processor go under or left or something, and there were still payments needing to be made on bills that they had accrued over prior years or bond payments that still need to be paid. And so we want to take that risk away. We want to be able to say, okay, if anybody does that in the future, they are still on the hook, or whoever takes over their facility is still on the hook for paying the city back for the cost of that project. And so that's why we decided to go this route. As Maria said, this project was requested by the processors because we had a failure last summer and it shut them down for 3 days. And that's a huge financial impact to them. And so they said, yes, we are willing to cover the cost of this. So we said, okay, great. Now, let's sign the agreement and say that you agree to pay it back as well. And part of the reason we're giving the presentation tonight is because, one, we hope to be able to come back to bids. We'll have the bid openings this week, I think. And then if we get the agreement signed by the processors, then we can go forward with the bid. Otherwise, we'll just wait and see. But we wanted you to be aware of the agreement and of the project because it will come back to you for a second time.
Okay, so this would, if someone were to go bankrupt, one of the processors were to go bankrupt in some fashion or sell out to a different company or whatever the process would be, then the continued obligation of paying for this project in the monthly installments would transfer to whatever new agency was taking over from that.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Well, I'm thinking that's one more going to want to put on the agenda for adoption, and look forward to also working with the processors. Those folks adding value to our products that are in our community, help our community as well. So it's good they stepped up to the plate, and let's in return step up the plate and move to the next step. And thank you for the detailed explanation. It's great to see those news force mains out there.
Thank you.
Okay, we've been going a little over 90 minutes. How about we have about 3 more items to go. Be appropriate to take a few minute break. So 8:38 now. Let's we'll take a break until 8:43. So let's please start at 8:43. excuse me, we are back from a break, and we're going to continue on our meeting. We're going to go to item 4F, related to code amendments related to shared street frontages. And I see Mr. Gonzalez is on there. Introductory comments, Mr. White.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Mr. Gonzalez, our senior planner since September of 2018, will present the code amendment regarding street frontages. This is one of Jacob's projects he's been deeply involved with for actually several months now. And we think it will be both a benefit to the development community and to the overall public interest in helping accommodate much of our anticipated, or some of our anticipated 20-year growth.
Thank you, Rick. Good evening, Mayor and Council. As Rick mentioned, with regards to growth, we're inching closer to 75,000 people here. It's still need to take into consideration that we're forecasted to have around 120,000 in the next under 2 decades. So a lot more growth to move forward with. Because of that, staff has taken a look at the municipal code with the zoning to see where we could identify opportunities to encourage additional housing to be constructed. Along with interest from property owners and the development community, we decided to take a look at shared street frontages. And the concept of a shared street frontage is lots that have irregular shapes or due to topography that do not meet the municipal code requirement of abutting on a street. This would allow those lots to have housing built on them as long as they met the criteria that's stated later on in the ordinance. Particularly areas south of the interstate and west of 395, areas that were annexed into the city, developed or platted under different standards. We found as staff recently, or probably for a long time now actually, that there's a lot of parcels and lots that end up being landlocked, so they have no access whatsoever to any right-of-way. But we also have some parcels with some interesting shapes and geometry. And under the current municipal code, even though they might have more than enough space to accommodate to subdivide their property, because of the requirement of the municipal code to be on the street, they could not do that. Through the application of the shared street frontage, these lots that met those criteria would be allowed to subdivide, providing another mechanism for infill opportunities in the city. Infill opportunities or something that's mentioned quite a bit in local, state, regional guidelines and guidance, and that's also a goal of the city council. So the benefit of something like this would be that it would actually allow us to implement some of the infill goals and policies of our comprehensive plan, where right now that's a little bit harder to do. The ordinance, I wanted to point out before getting into some of the actual sketches of what this could look like, I wanted to point out a few points of the ordinance to clarify, because it's a rather lengthy ordinance. It states that the city's preferred method is still the standard method of being on a street, and that's the right thing to do. But for those that can't meet that requirement, here's a plan B for you. It's still got to be processed through the existing subdivision process. It still has to meet the emergency access requirements. So if the shared access or the private drive was 150 feet or longer, there needs to be considerations for emergency vehicle access, so a fire truck apparatus could safely get in and out in case of an emergency situation. Requirements for drainage to stormwater. And I wanted to add this specifically, although this is an opportunity to add housing for infill, it's not an upzone, it's not an added density. It still must meet the underlying residential zoning district's requirements. So for instance, you couldn't go into an RS12 or a different zone and go above and beyond. It still has to meet the lot size requirements, the setback requirements, frontage requirements, and the density requirements that are required that the municipal code states. Go through some. This table is kind of a quick reference guide. I'd like to add that we see these in a lot of jurisdictions. You can drive through a lot of cities and see where these exist, but not a lot of them actually have it in their code. I'm not sure why that is. I assume because it's hard to implement and then hard to regulate, but at least us having this provides us an opportunity to actually regulate it with a city process. Here is what, here's an example of what one adjacent lot would look like. So you'd have your existing lot that meets the requirement, that's got a big enough lot size to have another housing unit built. So you could see the requirement for an easement, the pavement, and the minimum lot frontage that correlates to the table, the first table that you saw, obviously a reference to the emergency turnaround access. This is a very basic sketch of this, so I'm sure that when we see these actually come in, they'll look a lot different, but they still have to meet the requirements. But this is kind of a reference to give us an example of what it could look like.
If you could go back just so that I'm clear. So that this is a case, there's an existing house that's roughly on the front half of a piece of property. To be clear, if this was a minimum lot size of 12,000 feet, in this case, this whole thing would actually be 24,000 feet or larger, such that wherever they decided, presumably the owner of the land decided to split it in roughly half, that there would be a minimum of 12 for either of the two.
Absolutely. If you're in the RS-12, you still have to meet the RS-12 requirements. This just allows you an opportunity to actually do that.
This isn't a 12,000 foot lot that suddenly became 6,000 and 6,000.
No, no.
Okay.
This is sort of a conservative approach at infill development. This would be a one with two adjacent lots behind the existing lot. Again, there's increases in the frontage width and easement width and pavement width that kind of correlate to the number of units being built behind. This would be the maximum allowed, and this might be, I'm not sure where in our city at this level this would be actually allowed, depending on the space. And what I mean by that is through the comprehensive planning UGA process, we worked with a consultant for a land capacity analysis that identified underutilized residential lots in the city. And these were lots that were two or three times larger than the minimum lot size requirement. So you're talking 40, 60,000 square foot lots. We found 160 acres available. Now, it doesn't mean that all those owners would like to do this, but if one of them wants to, they could now. But we also had a rather large number for vacant, but the underutilized is pretty telling that there's some land in the city designated as residential that we're not allowing through our current code to develop as much as it could. This is another example of what would look like if there was a duplex placed behind. Obviously, this would still have to meet the same requirements, but in case of a very large lot would allow this, this would be an appropriate use if that's what the owner would want to do. And again, if they met the long list of requirements identified in the municipal code. Are there any questions by council members?
Mr. Alvarado jumped right on it.
Yeah, I have a question about the easement. So in a situation like this, would they create an association to be sharing the cost of it and repair? I'm assuming obviously this would not be a city managed street. And so would that be in the language of
yes,
the
actually,
requirements for that?
within the ordinance, one of the specific line items is that there be a maintenance agreement before any license or certificate of occupancies were issued, where it'd be that it's similar to maybe a PUD.
I was glad to hear because I can see a lot of disputes about cracks and things like that. So
Yeah.
I'm glad that you thought about that.
And actually, just to be clear too, with the expectation there would be a easement in perpetuity be demonstrated before somebody in the back lot gets a development such that neighbors were to have a dispute and they said you no longer have access to the land and they come run into the city and say, hey, they won't let me live in my house anymore. Has that been contemplated in this?
I don't have an answer for you on that one right now. Just in the code or in the ordinance drafted, it's a maintenance agreement to take care of the easement and so forth. That's something we'll have to go back and make
And the
sure
reason I
it's
bring up,
addressed.
actually, I think my sister, who lives in Bothell, is on the front lot, and they wanted somebody in the back lot, and they actually said before they bought that house on the front lot that it would be sorted. We didn't want to get in a fight with the neighbors, so they had to agree that there would be a permanent easement for that back place, even though that might be one of those jurisdictions where it didn't contemplate that. That would be a question that I would have, is that if it's possible and reasonable for us to make sure that they get that easement is an easement in perpetuity to that back lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll go back to the ordinance and make sure that that's referenced correctly.
And just a follow-up question, and so my reading in version 5 is that if there are some physical features that, you know, make it impractical to build your regular lot, would that kind of make it so that they have need some form of variance for this, or is it just a straightforward, this is allowed and this is an option
I think
for you?
not a straightforward allowance. I think it would go through a review process internally as staff to ensure that if there is a topographic issue that the owner developer is presenting as the case, then that would be considered. One of the things that I wanted to make sure was referenced is that the current city's preferred method was identified early on in the ordinance, because that's eventually we'll have an expanded UGA. And this is more of an opportunity for infill, not necessarily brand new development in land that hasn't been touched yet. So we want to make sure new land is developed appropriately.
So at this point, are we looking at the process for someone to build this, or just maybe making this an allowed zoning, or is that something we need to consider as well? It's like, okay, what's the process? Do they need a variance to demonstrate that they have a hardship of developing you know, let's say they have this land and they're wanting to develop this kind of development, that they would have to demonstrate that they have that hardship?
I might defer to Rick on that with regards to a requirement of a variance.
Actually, both Mayor Watkins' question and yours, Mr. Alvarado, can be answered by, you'll recall Jacob referenced the subdivision process still must be gone through for each of the lots created. Okay. So on the subdivision itself, whether it's a short subdivision or long, well, it'd have to be a short subdivision, there will be language on the face of the plat that indicates that the arrangement is codified and permanent, and along with the requirement for a maintenance agreement. And then the variance question itself will be answered through the findings developed in association with this short subdivision. So once an application is submitted, staff will have to critically look at the application of topographic considerations or geometry of the lot or whatever the case may be, and make a finding that the non-public street frontage is a viable option in this certain circumstance.
Mr. Maloney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez, for this presentation. I think opportunities like this where we can clarify in our code or add additional options in our code is fantastic. Not requirements, options, right? So my only question is, why is there a limit of 3? Is this just, because I noticed that you go up to 3, but it specifically says not more than 3.
Mm-hmm.
What's the genesis of that requirement?
I think we're trying to take an incremental approach here to some infill opportunities. I think we want to be careful with how we implement this. As staff, we've received some phone calls and some visitors to the counter with encouraging signs, positive about this, from local property owners and even nonprofit agencies that do housing in the region. But we still, although their encouragement is there, this is the first time for us as a city looking at this method of infill development, and we want to make sure we're taking sort of an incremental approach to it. I'd also add that because it's private and a private access way, we don't necessarily have a lot of private streets other than the PUDs within our city, and we want to be careful with how we allow these to occur within the city limits.
Thank you.
Is it also reasonable to expect that some of these, especially if they've been annexed in, people are pretty aware of that principle of, oh, they're landlocked, they won't be able to get a road to their place. Suddenly, if we're talking about changing that, suddenly some neighbors might be concerned that suddenly a bunch of my houses went more in that they didn't expect to be built.
Yeah, and I think that would be a good example of that. And again, that's why I wanted to point out that this wasn't necessarily an up zone of density. You're still well within the requirements of the zoning that you were built under, or you zoned under.
And also, I know that Mr. White shared with us too an email from an individual or group that has also expressed some concern, I think, is what I haven't read full details of it. So this is not necessarily everybody is all exactly for it all the way. Mr. White?
Yes, thank you. And just to address Mr. Maloney's concern, Mr. Gonzalez is also working on a very closely related code project that involves our planned unit development ordinance and the ability to create private roads serving multiple lots within a development. So we decided to go forward with this first because it was the most straightforward. But at the same time, we're working closely with engineering and legal on something that would allow serial lot creation through private roads. And that's a bit of a more difficult task, but it's occurring now in conjunction with a related code amendment to our planned unit development ordinance.
And actually, I think Mr. Maloney just pointed out too, I might have jumped the gun a bit. The email we got is related to an item that's next on the agenda, but probably we'll be talking about in the near future too. So I wanted to make sure council had full discussion. This will be one of those look to the audience too. If anybody has any thoughts on this 4F, be an opportunity. I'm not seeing any hands raised. So I think the follow on from this is probably wanted to bring this for council for consideration. I haven't looked. Is there a specific expectation to adopt to this, or is this a work in progress? Mr. White?
Thank you. I think it's a work in progress. We would like to return to council quickly. Mr. Ferguson and I were discussing this briefly before the meeting started, and we have some tightening up to do in a couple of instances, but other than that, it should come to council most likely the first meeting in July.
Okay, so as a workshop item, or is potentially after discussion tonight as on a regular agenda with an update?
My guess is a regular agenda. I think the amendments are very minor.
Okay. If council's okay with that, then we'll look at that at a regular meeting in probably the first week in July. Mr. Gonzalez, thank you too.
Thank you.
I've always wondered about these because I've seen them in other cities, and so it's neat to understand the mechanics of all of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
With that, we go on to item G, which is code amendment related to special permits. Mr. White, again.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. This code amendment involves a request that was received, I think it was received in April, to allow auto wrecking yards as a conditional use or a special permit use in the C3 and I1 zones. Currently, auto wrecking yards are allowed in the I2 and I3 zones. Those are Pasco's heaviest industrial zoning districts. The Planning Commission considered this at a workshop in April and at a public hearing in May, and has recommended that the amendment be denied. Our current practice when this occurs is to take the requested amendment to council and see if they concur with the Planning Commission's recommendation, in this case, the recommendation of denial. If that's the case, we will prepare a resolution expressing that sentiment and bring it back to council for formal approval. The last time this happened was with the request to amend the municipal code to allow mini pigs to be regulated as any other household pet. And that was also recommended by denial by the Planning Commission, and council did concur. Other than that, if the Planning Commission recommends approval, they simply go through the normal process of workshop, et cetera, to gain council concurrence. I did pass out on the bench a email received from Mr. Dwight Hume, who's in the audience tonight. He may want to address council, but the long and short of it is Planning Commission has recommended approval. Staff is requesting council's concurrence or not on that recommendation, and we'll take it from there.
Okay. I'm going to start off. Council have an opinion or questions that they want to ask on this? Then I would say, yes, sir. You must be the person or the group that sent the email. Are you Mr. Dwight Hume?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members of the council, my name is Dwight Hume. I am a land use planning consultant, and I have been working on this issue for my clients who, for the first time, are here in attendance tonight. They have a wrecking yard that is split between now, let's call it 40 acres. They have, the north half of it is non-conforming because it was always there in an industrial zone. Now it's C3, as is the south 20 acres. And that portion was never part of the wrecking yard and therefore doesn't have the similar non-conforming rights to the wrecking yard. The reason that they have not been participating directly in this is because we've been dealing with, historically, with the looking for a zoning tool, as I call it, to adopt into the zoning section of the municipal code that would enable in this case, this wrecking yard to go through formal process, be conditioned appropriately, and allowed to continue on. The Planning Commission, as you know, said they didn't want this to go forward, and staff had recommended denial. It's an awkward situation to rebut in the sense that, okay, I understand where the staff is coming from in terms of we have zones that will allow wrecking yards, but we have a situation that we need to clean up, and oddly enough, we can be there in it, and we can have the car hulks within the south half of this property anyway. So the land use doesn't just fizzle away and as a non-conforming use is designed to do. It will be there in perpetuity. So let's figure out a way to make it better. But it was never appropriate to talk about what I just mentioned to you, because that is at a different phase. If we had adopted some kind of regulations, then it would go forward as a conditional use permit and be heard accordingly, and then both sides, opponents and so on, if any, could speak. And the decision maker, in this case, I think it would be ultimately your zoning hearing examiner, who would make his decision, and from there it would go to court. It wouldn't go to the Planning Commission, wouldn't come to the council. It would just go through appropriate channels and be taken care of. These folks have a business that the State Patrol and the division that deals with wrecking yards and car hulk hauling and whatnot just gives them gold stars. And it's an incredibly clean operation, and I visited the site and saw that firsthand. But if you were to look at the Google Earth photos and go into the historical, you would see a mess aerially on the property before these folks took over. Today you look at it and it looks like a parking lot at Walmart. Every car is spaced exactly across and underneath each one, and they're all clean and drained of their fluids and so on, and is a piece of carpet remnant just to make sure that there's no problems. I'm just trying to say in that regard, these folks are extraordinary in terms of what their operation is. The operation also provides a service. There are 5 wrecking yards in this community, and none of them, they all have a special niche in the marketplace. They're not really drastically competing against each other to try to survive. They coexist compatibly. In this instance, these folks, among other things, provide for the city of Pasco, Richland, and Kennewick. They accommodate over 2,000 vehicles a year that the law enforcement people or others call them and say, hey, we've got this abandoned vehicle, and they take over and process it in their facilities. Nobody else does. So they've been quite a service to the municipalities. And what I would like to do is have a hearing on this next week, or whenever you could schedule it, and hear the rest of the story, because the Planning Commission wasn't given that opportunity to hear about how innocuous this is and how compatible it is. And I don't want to go into all the details right now, but rest assured we can provide you a story that was never really shared with the Planning Commission, which probably would have made a different decision out of it. Normally, when there's opposition to the Planning Commissions, and I deal with a lot of planning agencies and municipalities, but normally the Planning Commission decision as a recommendation only, if there's objections to that, then the legislative body sets a hearing for it so they can hear both sides of the story, serve rebuttals to that, and then make a decision. we definitely need to be able to share the rest of the story and trust that you could give us that opportunity next week or whenever you want to schedule it. That's what I'm saying. I'm sticking with it. Okay?
And I'm going to ask staff, because my recollection is we've talked about zoning and a variety of things, and zoning has never been discussed about individual projects. It's about the rules of the road for the entirety of the city. So asking, even if the worst or the best tenant isn't something that is supposed to affect zoning, and I would imagine that's one of the principles that probably came with the Planning Commission. So the question I guess I have, Mr. White, is this the kind of thing that is appropriate for a special permit request? I realize that still there might be the evidence might suggest it's no, but is it more appropriate than trying to change zoning to make something fit? Thoughts, Mr. White?
Well, and actually that question and that discussion is reflected in the record that council has access to with the agenda report. So yes, that was discussed. A rezone and accompanying comprehensive plan amendment was discussed at the Planning Commission as an option. And a zoning map of the city was also presented to the Planning Commission that indicated where the C3 zoning is, so that the commission could get an example, a perspective on where something like this may be applied for should it become part of the Pasco Municipal Code.
Okay. Mr. Serrano?
Thank you. Handful of questions here. So let's start off with, why did the Planning Commission as opposed to the hearing officer hear this?
This is a code amendment, so it's not site-specific. So if it were a site-specific request, for example, for a rezone, the hearing examiner would have conducted the public hearing.
Excellent, thank you.
And to just augment that too, this does not preclude the process of going through one to submit to a hearing examiner if it were to be presented that way. Is that true?
Assume if this becomes part of the code, then they would submit a special permit or conditional use permit to the hearing examiner.
So it's a first step, second step situation.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Serrano. Let me
No, absolutely.
augment.
It's part of our discussion, right? So if this client pursued a rezone, it says that it would require a comprehensive plan amendment as well. Is that correct, Mr. White?
Yes.
Okay, so sounds like quite a bit of work on that. And would this not be grandfathered in as a non-conforming use that should be grandfathered in based on its existence?
No, the front half of the operation is a legal non-conforming use. The back half is not.
Okay.
And augment too, a non-conforming use does not have a time limit on it?
It does not,
So
unless
the
it's...
non-conforming use could potentially remain in perpetuity if
could.
it does this is the same way.
Yes.
Okay.
But then the back half would still have its issues.
Right.
Yes.
I guess I'm looking at the addition to the code. Quite frankly, I'm not opposed to it. I'll make that statement right now.
Okay. Other thoughts, council members? Mr. Maloney.
I take with much consideration, Mr. Watkins, your initial thoughts of making a change to the code when we're talking, or to zoning and how zonings work across the entire city for one specific project, regardless of the merit of the individual project, is something that strikes me as something that should be done thoughtfully during the comprehensive plan update, not as a one-off. If we need to change the way that zones are administered throughout the entire city, we do have a process for that, and we do take very careful deliberation over that. So I would generally consider that to be the key. I have read the record and have read the additional notes here. I am confused as to why this isn't being considered as a specific rezone request for this individual property. That has not been rejected in the past. Is that correct, Mr. White?
No, Mr. Hume requested a code amendment. The option of the zone change and comp plan amendment has not yet been pursued.
Could I address that?
Please, as far as...
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, thank you.
The reason that we did not seek a zone change is because We would have to go back to the industrial zone. And according to your comprehensive plan, that's not suitable for this area anymore. That's why you downzoned it. You just a change in land use patterns and trends. So we would have no chance of getting an industrial zone change. And that's currently the only zone that permits wrecking yards. What you were also addressing was the suitableness of this as you looked at the citywide map that staff presented. One of the things I was unprepared to respond to is why just because those zones exist, it doesn't mean that there's going to be a wrecking yard there. And I can explain in more detail why, but tonight's not the night to do that. So really there's, on the one hand, categorically, yeah, here's where all your C3 zones are. There's the potential for a wrecking yard. But let's listen to these folks and others that it's a whole different ball game from when back in the 70s, your zoning codes had a 5-acre provision with a conditional use in rural land. I'm talking about Spokane County. Those don't exist anymore because they're not viable. And a lot of property in your C3 is not large enough to accommodate what we're doing. But in this case, we could clean up and actually condition and improve the situation from what it even is now for more compatibility if there was a provision, a zoning tool to do this. And but I'm prepared next time that we meet, if we can, to explain why it doesn't open Pandora's box and set a precedent in the C3 zone. Okay?
So I guess from my perspective, the Planning Commission passed their recommendation on to us back in May 16th. And in general, I'm happy to talk about this again in the future. And I understand from Mr. White that we will be needing to pass a resolution one way or the other in the future. Is that correct, Mr. White?
Yes, if council wants to place this on the agenda for a resolution concurring with the Planning Commission recommendation, that will happen next week. If council wants to take the step of conducting a hearing, then appropriate notice that's the same for all public hearings would need to be prepared, and that would occur, my guess is, the first meeting in July.
Is there a particular need for this to become a public hearing?
No.
Then I'd be in favor of placing it on the agenda next week and have that conversation, and certainly we'll have an opportunity to hear from the public during that discussion, right? So that'd be my favor of moving forward quickly and make sure we can resolve this matter expeditiously.
So seeing a couple nods on that, putting it on the agenda for consideration next week with the Planning Commission recommendation. Council can ask additional questions, think about it more. If you want to bring more material to us, we're not going to have a 2-hour time frame, but we'll have an adequate, if there's anything that you haven't presented to us tonight in a concise form,
That would be fine.
would be an opportunity, okay?
Appreciate that opportunity.
Mr. Serrano?
Yeah, thanks. Mr. Hamm, can you bring some of the historical operational records, how long it's been in existence, maybe compliance status, if there have any violations that would be pertinent to be.
Yes, there were, and that's what we're trying.
And any remediational efforts that have been taken, to any remediation efforts, if there were violations, just to show the status of this facility, if they're good neighbors, that sort of thing. I think that would be helpful at least for me.
And I'd actually ask a step further if that's something you can make available before Monday of next week, and you can send it to our clerk,
Right.
the copies to the council in advance if there's anything of depth, so that we can look at it before.
That would be helpful at this point in the meeting.
Conversely, also staff, if there's anything on the principles of rezoning and the ideas that we've talked about, if there's any amplifying information staff would like to share with council on that too, would be helpful. Council okay with that, Mr. Alvarado?
I do have a question. If we were to have a discussion about this, would this be something that would be needed to inform neighbors about, that we would be making a
decision on something like this?
No, because this still would be about a zoning change, and if a zone change were to occur, if we were to disagree with the planning commission ultimately, then it still is going to come back to issues of individual properties, and I believe there's going to be other steps in the process.
If what we propose were accepted by the council, then yes, then we go forward with a actual public hearing before the hearing examiner. Everybody has a chance to speak. We're just trying to get the zoning amendment adopted is all right now.
Did you need the floor anymore, Mr. Serrano?
Oh, no, I just wanted to clarify that process, that in the event that council decides not to move forward with the recommendation, then it would open into a public hearing. Is that the next step, correct, Mr. White? So next week, if we vote no as a majority, what would the then step be?
You vote no to not concur with the planning
Correct.
commission recommendation, then we would take your direction on where to go from here. That may be to craft language that would allow it then, and then that would again come back to council in the form of an ordinance.
Okay, might be worth having that language.
Okay.
But I'd ask council if for some reason that were to happen, then there would need to be specifics on asking staff to where to go, not just fish for something.
Okay, my direction would be to have the full public hearing.
Okay.
In the event that we were to have a majority making that decision.
I think we're well ahead of ourselves on this.
Okay, no, we gotta walk both roads.
Okay. That okay from we've covered that from a workshop perspective, sir? Thank you. Okay, with that, we are one more item on the agenda in section 4 related to Washington City's Authority Risk Pool Update. Introductory comments, Mr. Strebel.
Just quickly, Mr. Mayor, as you know, the city's a member of WCIA, Washington City's Insurance Authority. I've had the privilege of representing the city for many years on that Washington City's group and familiar with the process. Justin Tucker, our training safety specialist, is going to be taking over those responsibilities, and he's here to give you a brief update on the city's most recent risk profile.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. After a long night of presentations, you get to listen to a guy talk about insurance. So first off, I'm now going to be the new delegate for this. I'm going to go over the risk profile for the city of Pasco the last 5 years, and I'm going to be going over all our claims. One of the new things as the delegate, I'll be going to all the full board meetings, about 3 a year, I believe. City Manager Dave Zabel now is on the executive board of the WCIA, which they do the day-to-day, month-to-month operations, get kind of control the how WCIA operates, which is good to have that representation for us being on the east side of the state. So we're still general liability and auto liability. We find it financially advantageous for us to underwrite property. So we are still sticking with the general and auto liability. One change we just recently is we got rid of the $100,000 deductible, and now we're doing a zero deductible, which I think is going to be a benefit for us. WCI will be way more involved in every single claim, whether it's small or large, because they're going to be paying for it. Even though our assessment goes up, I still think it's better for us to go to the zero deductible. WCI breaks us all the cities up into 4 actuarial groups. We're in the 4th one, which is the largest one. You have to have about 400,000 worker hours to be in this one. The other 3 are obviously the smaller ones. And then we have a 5th one, which is for special entities that worker hours don't really affect their risk and what their business is. Obviously, we have Kennewick, Richland, Moses Lake, and Walla Walla in our area. But this represents the largest pool. And through this PowerPoint, you'll see how we'll compare ourselves to our actuarial group. So this is like a 30,000-foot view of our expected versus actual claims. There's probably a lot of stuff on here, so hard for everyone to see. But if we just look on that first column here, the actual group 4, if you go down, it's shown here that for our group, they're expecting about 3,600 claims in this 5-year period. And Pasco, for our percentage and our size, we should be getting about 188 of those. We actually only had 147 of those, so we did not exceed our claim amount, which is a good thing in this case. But when we look down on the second half of the chart, we're expected in our group to spend about 42 million in claims. Pasco is expected about 2.2 of that, and we were up high on about 2.6 million, so we're a little above on that. A lot of times one claim can really shoot that up. We'll kind of see that a little later on. This next one, expected versus actual by department, breaks it down by department. So we have administration, airport, court, jail, parks and recs, planning, police, fire, and then all your public works departments, engineering, sewer, storm, streets, and water utility. As you can see in the two middle columns, there are expected claim count and the actual claim count. We don't necessarily exceed all ours, but in the few of them we did. Look at court, there was only one, we expected to have 0 claims. We actually got 1 claim for $250, so obviously we exceeded. But if you look down in police, we're expected to have 40, and we exceeded it by 69. So that just breaks it down to the bottom of the totals, the same numbers from the previous slide. This just kind of shows it to you in by department. So this slide, council, goes over the frequency on the top, and the bottom half is the severity. As you can see, if you look through this, the colors there, they're fairly similar across the board. You have public safety in blue, employment practices, which is a small bar. It's which you can't really see it in 17, 18, but on 14 and 16 you'll see it. That's the employment practices. They have general liability in green, arrows, emissions, and automobile and liability. As you can see, it's pretty consistent through the amount of claims we do have in the frequency. However, if you look down in severity, on the bottom half of the chart, you can see in 2015 we had a public safety claim that was really high. And I was talking about how we'll get a claim or two that comes through that just blows it up. That happened in 15. If you look back up on the top of the chart, on the frequency, 2015 we had the least amount of claims in that 5-year period. But yet in 2015 it had the highest cost because we had 1 or 2 claims that really shot it up, public safety claims. As you can see in 16, 17, 18, especially 18, we just barely have a few general liability claims. There's a trend going down. However, I got to let you know that those claims aren't fully ripened yet as far as the underwriting claims management process. There's still some potential exposure to the claims, and we did look back into it. There is only 1 claim that's open. It's not a severe claim. So I think those claims, the trend down is fairly accurate. But if you look at 14, it's lower, and if you kind of go on the back, it's lower. I think what's happened is we had a spike there, and I think we're going to start coming back down. So that's good. This next one breaks us down into pies. The city of Pasco is the top chart, top pie, and it compares us to the actuarial group that we're involved in. On the bottom left and the bottom right is the WCIA as a pool. WCIA as a pool. As you can see, the actuarial group 4 and WCIA, they mirror each other. General liability accounts for about 50% of the claims. Then you have personnel and taking up almost, public safety taking up about 1/4, and under that's personnel. If you look at our pie chart on the top, police is accounting for about 63% of the claims, and also the severity too. So we know we need to focus on what we're doing there. But if you look at the general liability, we far excel the whole group as well as our actuary group, especially also if you look in the personnel. 2% of our claims are personnel, where about 14% in the other groups. So we excel in those groups. We obviously need to work on what we're going on in police department. So this next chart we have, it's the top losses by frequency as well as severity. On the left you have the frequency, and on the right you have severity. So if you look at the top 2, on frequency we have public safety impounds and public safety care, custody, and control. Those are the only 2 we have in double digits. On the right, by severity, we have public safety excess of force. We have a $1.3 million one, and auto liability failure to yield, about $300,000. Those are a lot of times our ambulances. They don't have to yield, but that gets us in accidents, nature of the work, especially with police department. They're out running code, nature of the work. We're gonna get those, and those are actually on the rise, I think. If you look down at the bottom on that severity, you can see that our top 10 losses account for 93% of our claims, or top cost. That's a huge, a substantial number there just on the top 10. But if you look on our frequency side, on the bottom, our top 10 claims, frequency claims, only account for 52% of it. So that's more evenly spread out. It just tells you that we have a few claims that come up that just really spike it up, like what I think happened in 2015. WCI also offers a lot of things that don't really cost us directly, but obviously it probably comes from our assessments that we pay. We have consultations, grants, pre-defense, and reimbursements for training if we send people to training. So if you look down on the bottom right, it might be kind of hard to see. In the green will be the city of Pasco, and the blue will be our actual group that we're compared to because the city's our size, or close to our size. On consultations, we far exceed the rest of our group. However, the group exceeds us in pre-defense. I actually think it's a good thing that we're doing consultations before we get to pre-defense. The other cities I'm looking at is they're going straight to pre-defense, they're not consultant first, where we like to go get right involved in consulting, prevent ourselves from having to go into pre-defense. So I think those numbers actually represent us really well. And if you look at reimbursements on the far right, we far exceed the whole group in reimbursements. We send a lot of people to training, get reimbursed for it. They provide a lot of training. In fact, we started hosting some here at our police department this last year for the first time in quite a while. Free training for all our guys, and management and as well as employees. And on the grants, I applied for a grant for the fire department last year. Every year we get applied, we didn't get it. But for example, we saw that automobile liability was going up, right? So we have a lot of backups that are huge ladder trucks in our fire department. They're driving these big trucks through alleys and all these calls. So we're looking for a grant to get on that. Didn't get it, but we'll continue to do that. The city, WCI offers grants, so we'll continue to try to do that. WCI also does an audit with us. Every year we pick a topic. We can pick whatever topic we want it to be. This last year we did engineering on contracts with construction companies that are coming in, going through the language of making sure we get the certificate of liability insurance done, make sure they list us as additional assured, making sure there's no holes in it. So we went through that whole thing. The year before that, we did it in the permit process in the rec department. Made a lot of changes actually to our program because of that. So WCA offers a lot of good stuff to help us. And they're all municipalities, so they're not like we're going into another market and getting a private insurance where they might know something about municipalities. This is what all these guys have done since the 80s, and they only focus on cities, so it's a real benefit to us. Speaking of reimbursements, this is training that we either got free or reimbursed since January up to today. We'll probably double this before the end of the year. Some of them are duplicates because we sent multiple people to different trainings. But this is something that WCI offers us, and we'll continue to do this in the future. So that's a quick rundown on a 5-year report of how we've done in WCIA. So you guys any questions for me?
So this is your first time presenting this and having gotten it
a
number of years, and you did a great job.
Oh, appreciate it.
and one of the things I've also learned about that process is that we look at that and decide where we're going to focus on maybe improving, because there's big dollar items. Yeah, there may be one.
This slide right here really helps us do that.
There may be one thing that happened that's a big dollar item, but you also can tell if there are trends developing. My understanding is also that the risk pool is a time-based thing, so that if you have something, your rates are going to skyrocket the next year, but they may go up. But then they also are going to come back down, and that's rated on your experience level as also related to experience level across the groups.
Yeah, somewhat. They base it off your hours. Like we have 400,000 worker hours, so we get based on our worker hours as well as our experience, how we've been performing. We've been kind of going on a downtrend, so I think that's going to help benefit us after we get done absorbing that 2015 was a rough year. You're talking about looking on where we can focus on. This one right here, this slide, really helps us do that. You can look and see specifically what areas, like I was talking about, auto liability went up, and obviously public excessive force or public safety excessive force. Those are areas that we can this is where we can send to the police chief, fire chief, directors of those departments, and really focus on where we need to change, not maybe policy, procedures, or maybe more training in those areas to help mitigate those risks. So this is to me the most important part that we get out of it. It'd be kind of cool if we can compare how we didn't know all this stuff I was comparing by other cities. It'd be nice to see in this category how we compare to the other cities, if we're having the same problems, but we don't have that information.
Any questions by council? Thank you for sticking around this evening. We have a long agenda. We appreciate the details. That's what we're great about workshops. So we're done with section 4 on the agenda, and we're going to go to 5 miscellaneous discussion. And I'm going to start off actually because I have also I've seen a couple of folks in the audience, and I have a question specifically because my understanding is June 22nd is Juneteenth celebration on Saturday at 9:30. It's second in Lewis. Anything? And I see a person here. You have a 1 minute or less summary of that, Ms. Cecilia? You want to come up here so that there are about 3 probably folks still with us on Facebook Live, I'm guessing.
Thank you. I'm Cecilia Randolph, and I am the Juneteenth Parade Coordinator for the last 20 years. And
I got those dates and time right?
You sure do. I'm here tonight because the city of Pasco have some changes, and change is good. But change should be done from the city in a timely manner. I put in our application for the parade in April.
Well, ma'am, I just wanted, I wanted to make sure that you
Okay,
have
I'm
an event
gonna-
coming up.
Yep, I'm gonna get to
And-
that.
And if you wanted to talk about something, actually, that's when we have our regular agenda.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I wanted to make sure the Juneteenth didn't get missed.
No, I don't want it missed. That's why I'm talking about the parade. I followed the city. They have some new rules, and it's we need a certified traffic control. And so I have done that.
Ma'am, you're going to have to address council here.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm addressing them. Sorry. I have followed those rules, that I have got a traffic control supervisor, and I have it signed off. And I met Dan tonight, which is the city engineer, and I've given everything to him. The problem I'm having is that who we got was the pavement surface control, and they're busy that whole weekend. They have the hogs and dogs, and they have Cool Desert Night. So they don't have any staff for our street closure.
And you're talking about a company that's not a Pasco.
Correct.
Group, it's a company
But I
which
was
are-
told to use them by the city of Pasco. That's who they recommended. So we've done that. I'm here to ask for the support of the city of Pasco to help us execute what you guys are asking.
Again, Cecilia, you're talking, please talk with
Yeah.
council, okay?
I keep looking.
We're the policymakers here. If
Yeah,
you want
you-
to talk to us,
yeah,
we'll listen
you
to you.
are. But it wasn't done in a timely manner. I was given 5 days to get this done. And if I don't get the support from the city of Pasco, our parade is canceled. And we've been doing this over 40 years. The other thing I want to know is how can we get this executed in the city so this doesn't happen again? Because I was told that we weren't a part of the city. I was told that we were a liability for the city. I was told to take my parade and have it on the sidewalk, and I couldn't use the streets. But I've complied with everything. We have insurance. We've had insurance over 40 years. Actually, the guy who just spoke, he helped me with our insurance. So we've done everything, but I can't get no street closure.
So how about stick around after the meeting, myself, Mr. Zabel. Mr. Zabel, would you be willing to talk with Cecilia?
Okay.
After the meeting? Okay.
Okay.
That said, 22nd is when you're still planning to have Juneteenth, which has been a tradition for 40-plus years.
Correct.
Okay? And you've invited council members, anybody who wants to attend that event?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Good to see you, ma'am.
Okay. But the other thing, how do I get on the agenda so this don't happen again, so we can really, because this is not the place to do it.
The other meeting has an opportunity in the agenda for public to speak about things that are not further along in the agenda. So either last week or the next week would be the appropriate place. So look at the agenda.
Okay.
And then you do get 3 minutes is the usual sort of thing. And the point is you share with the council something that they may not already know.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Miscellaneous discussion. Mr. Zabel.
Okay, so we will, on that, we'll try to get that to resolution, so you won't have it before you next week, other than to hear that it's resolved, so.
Okay.
But this evening, I want to note that it marks Stan's final council meeting. And later this week, he's going to close out, I think, a very distinguished 43-year career in local government. He's worked for cities and counties in Arizona and Utah and Washington State, and 20 years here in Pasco. And most of Stan's time spent at the chief appointed official level or deputy or department head. That translates to a lot of meetings, 906 council meetings. This was 906 council meeting tonight. Wow. Not that we keep track about it like that. Hall of Fame numbers, you know. But a couple thousand, or about 1,000 more beyond that. He's probably approaching 2,000 city or county commission meetings. Stan noted that county commission meetings counted double. And, you know, along with that, you know, Stan, as many of you are acutely aware, supports a lot of boards and commissions, and he's done that his whole career. So he's probably got another 1,000, maybe a couple thousand of those, and probably 1,600 or so 50-hour work weeks. You know, he's been in quite a career. He's probably had maybe a couple easy work weeks, I suppose, maybe. This one isn't going to be too bad. But not a surprise, I don't think, to anyone here that Stan's working right down to the end, worrying about us, making sure we have everything passed down and documented so we can figure it out when he walks out the door. I want to note, Stan, you know, throughout his career has just been somebody I think, I've only worked with Stan for pretty close to 5 years now, but I can tell he's the kind of person you could always count on, whether you're elected or staff or the public. And words like capable and thoughtful and reliable, intelligent come to mind. Versatile. I think tonight was a perfect last meeting for Stan. There was economic development, there was mitigation of development impacts, sewer treatment plant, bugs, slimy things on rocks, transportation planning. There was acronyms like CIP, TAP, WWTP, WSOT, processed water, or PWRF. Some code stuff, and one of his favorite things he got to close out with is insurance. And yeah, he loves that. And he actually handed that off, so I know he's particularly proud at how well Justin's picked that up and is going to be representing the city. So on a personal note, I first met Stan, I think we met in the 1990s when Stan was up at Ferndale and I was in Marysville, you know, kind of one of those see you next year at conference kind of relationships. And so many years later, it was an honor to be able to serve with Stan for almost 5 years. And I'll note that it takes a lot of people to run an organization this size and scope. And I can tell you, we wouldn't be where we are as a city without Stan's leadership and his efforts and contributions over the years on so many different levels. You know, I'd like versatile probably isn't even a broad enough word. So. I will note that 43 years operating at an executive level with that level of success it's an amazing accomplishment, you know, just in itself. Yeah, I'll note that he's a UW graduate, you know, so that's probably gave him a little bit of a leg up, you know. But true to form, Stan's been pretty low key about his retirement. He's been grinning a lot lately for inexplicable reasons, but. He hasn't been talking much about it, but we all get to see him off at his retirement celebration Wednesday, June 12th, 3 to 5 p.m. at the community room at the Police Community Services Building. And we'll be able to wish him well and as he prepares for his next phase. So, thank you, Stan.
Thank you. And I know that staff work for you, but I feel compelled to augment a couple of thoughts that Mr. Zabel had because I do notice that the most senior person in the room is Mr. Strebel, who has been here more meetings than anybody in this room, including myself. And I'm looking around to make 100% sure. Yes, that's true. If Mr. Kerr was here, that would be the different story. But also that when you talk about those synonyms and adjectives that describe him too, and I can think of many cases over the years that Stan has been an incredible help to council members, to myself personally, and a couple of those things I think, and I'm maybe not going to get them in order of importance, but a couple that come to mind actually were our past manager, longtime council manager, or city manager, Gary Crutchfield, and arguably Mr. Strebel could have maybe done it a little bit differently, but decided to lead the city as the leader for a period of time as the assistant city manager and acting manager, and because it was the right thing to do for the city, I think, and it was an incredibly noble gesture, and then also to then continue on. I have a feeling Mr. Strebel could have retired a number of years ago, but I also understand that he likes what he does at work, and it shows in every day that he does that work. And my understanding is also that Mr. Strebel sense of community service is going to extend past our time with the city, and then is already looking about how to give back to his community and world in the coming years. And I just want to thank Mr. Strebel and also give the floor to Mr. Strebel if you have any thoughts this evening.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have one quick thought. My first city council meeting here in Pasco was in February 1999, and Charlie Kilberry was the mayor, and Joe Jackson was on that city council, and we finished the evening at, I think it was 7:18 with a 7 o'clock meeting. And quite frankly, as I've aged, this 9:45 dismissal time, 9:45 thereabouts, is just way past my bedtime. So it's time to retire. It's been a great honor and blessing for me to serve with you, members of the council, public, staff, my colleagues, and I have really appreciated the opportunity, and I'm grateful for it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And one more clap, and I'm going to stand. And anything else, Mr. Zabel?
Not this evening, Mayor.
How about council? Any other miscellaneous discussion? Hearing none and hoping the answer is no. Any need for executive session?
I wouldn't dare say yes.
With that, we are out before 9:45. Thank you all for coming.